Part 27. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 263. Thank you so much to Sister You this time. If it weren't for you, I might never have thought that Sister Mengru's luck would be like this until now. Musian walked Ziyan all the way to the door of Tianhe Garden and sincerely thanked the leader. It is already late at night, and in the quiet garden, the flowers, plants, and trees have withered due to winter, and the water on the blue pond is rippling, reflecting the white light under the sky. Yuzian is wearing a more casual Xian robe, with a little cinnabar between her eyebrows. She has a beautiful face and a cold temperament, but she seems to have a hint of charm, making people's eyes involuntarily attracted to her. Existences outside the rules of heaven and earth may have such bad luck, so Wei Mengru's bad luck may not really be bad luck, but may be a restriction of heaven. This speculation overturned Musian's past understanding of luck. If Yuzian hadn't come to him tonight, he probably wouldn't have thought about this in his life. Yuzian shook her head and smiled lightly. You don't have to thank me. She is a disciple of my section. Besides, I promised you in the past that I would investigate the cause of that bad luck. However, I'm afraid I can't help you with the origin of that black mist. She is the leader of the Liangyi section. If she rashly contacts the group in the southern wilderness, they will probably be extremely wary of them. Musian nodded slightly and said, I will handle this matter properly. The other party may not be wary of you, but you still have to be careful about your own safety. Yuzian gave Musian a meaningful look. The natural cauldron in this disciple's body is much more delicious than before. However, she has now broken through her own bottleneck, and there is no need for a natural furnace in a short time. But after that, Musian smiled and said, disciples have their own sense of proportion. No matter what, it was impossible for him to really complete the deal with Regina before the Ascension Conference. After all, the 3 emperor-level medicinal herbs must be kept in Dongzhou no matter what. To put it simply, before the transaction, he wanted to have another round of whoring to understand where the black mist on Wei Mengru that blocked the secrets came from. Whether it can be done, Musian is not sure, but at least she can be allowed to speak. After all, he still has some experience in the honey trap aspect. After sending Yuzian away, Musian watched the woman's leaving figure in the distance, and then slowly exhaled after she disappeared. It seems that the secrets of Sister Mengru may not only involve Dongzhou, but also the shadow of Nanhuang. Regina has a high status in the southern wilderness, but she may not know about Wei Mengru. But no matter what, some clues can still be found from her. Because of the sex formation, the white light in the sky began to gradually dim at this time. There were originally many monks gathered in front of the Liuli Palace tonight, wanting to see who caused the strange phenomenon. However, as the white light faded, people all left one after another. Musian then withdrew his gaze and was about to return to the villa. At this time, he suddenly heard a pleasant voice coming from behind him. Mr. Mu, please stay. In mid-air, Lin Qiu arrived belatedly, her pink and white dress clinging to her delicate body in the night wind, outlining her graceful figure. And what she was holding in her hand was the Aurora necklace. Musian turned his head and looked, and said oh shit in his heart. Why is she here? If it had been earlier and I had bumped into Senior Sister and the others, I wouldn't be able to explain it even if I had 100 mouths to open. Musian felt a little happy in his heart, and then said in surprise, Miss Lin, why are you here? Lin Qiu's skirt fluttered and fell lightly from the air. With his hands behind his back, he came to Musian. There was a shy smile on her face. There is a strange phenomenon in Liuli Palace tonight, so I will stop by Mr. Mu to thank you for saving your life that day. When she said this, she handed the Aurora necklace to Musian. I added some other special spirit stones to it to enlighten the spirit of the weapon. I hope Mr. Mu doesn't mind, she said softly. These people are all little rich women, how can they give away such valuable things casually, Musian took the Aurora necklace and immediately felt the specialness of this necklace. This necklace seems to be able to give the wearer a purifying effect to a certain extent. When Musian took the necklace, the pink light that originally emitted from his body immediately dimmed a bit. Musian's eyes moved slightly, and he raised his head and said, "This necklace seems to be able to block the secrets of heaven." "It can shield the secrets of heaven to a certain extent." Lin Qiu nodded lightly. "My clan's ancestral weapon is related to this, so I ordered the elders of my clan to add some secret techniques to it." "The ancestral weapon that shields Tianji?" No wonder the people in Qianyuan Pavilion wanted to get this ancestral artifact that day. Musian hesitated for a moment and said, "Miss Lin, this thing is a bit too valuable." "Mr. Mu, do you think my life is not as valuable as this necklace?" Lin Qiu tilted his head slightly and showed a beautiful smile. The other party's words came to this point, so Musian had no choice but to nod and accept. After putting on the necklace, he and Lin Qiu chatted for a while. "It seems that someone in Li Yulai Palace has understood the Tao Yun today. This Immortal Ascension conference may be more difficult than imagined," Lin Qiu said. Upon hearing this, Musian suddenly felt heavy and said, "Yeah, it's a bit tricky. Although Ye Lingxuan's becoming stronger is both good and bad for him, if she wins the Immortal Conference in the end, it will still be a bit troublesome. But thinking about it from another perspective, Ye Lingxian is already very strong, so it doesn't matter if she is a little stronger. If the finals of the Ascension Conference were really between him and Ye Lingxian, then as long as he suppressed Ye Lingxian that night, suppressed a few more times, Ye Lingxian would not be able to compete the next day, and wouldn't he be the winner?" Musian began to think about future plans. "What's going on with Mr. Mu's pink luck?" Lin Qiu suddenly asked in confusion. Musian came back to his senses, shook his head helplessly and smiled. "I also want to know the origin of this luck, but I haven't found any clues." He paused and continued, "It's not bad luck anyway, so it doesn't matter." Lin Qiu looked thoughtfully at Musian's handsome face and the gentle smile on his face, and said to himself, "If I can completely inherit the heaven-gazing ancestral artifact of Swanyan Palace, maybe it's possible to deduce the origin of your luck." Musian thought for a moment, "Can the ancestral artifacts of Swanyan Palace spy on the secrets of heaven and even find out the origin of my pink luck?" Lin Qiu nodded. "Theoretically, that ancestral weapon can do it, but it needs to wait until I can inherit the Swanyan Palace. It seems that the ancestral artifacts in the Swanyan Palace should have been left behind by a certain Hedeo realm boss who was good at deducing heavenly secrets in the past." Musian looked at Lin Qiu's pink and white figure and thought a little more in his heart. It was still snowing tonight, but the two of them seemed unaware and chatted for a long time in front of Tianhe Garden. "Thanks to meeting a kind person tonight, otherwise I might not have been able to find Tianhe Garden and almost got lost in the Li Yulai Palace at this time," Lin Qiu suddenly said. "Li Yulai Palace is only so big, is this little beauty Erodi? But no wonder she came so late, it turned out that she got lost." Musian smiled and said, "Most of the disciples of my sect are very kind-hearted. Who is the person Miss Lin met? Maybe I even know him." "Senior Sister Lan," Lin Qiu said. Musian's smile faltered. "She seemed to be attracted by the natural vision. I happened to bump into her when I was going back. Thanks to her, otherwise I would have returned without success tonight." Lin Qiu looked up at Shui Ye, said with a somewhat emotional tone. "Although Senior Sister Lan looks very cold, I feel that she is actually a very gentle person. She even chatted with me for a long time." Looking at Lin Qiu's expression of admiration, Musian said in a difficult tone, "What are you talking about?" "She asked me if I was here to see someone, and I said yes, and then she asked me if I was here to see Mr. Mu." Lin Qiu paused, looking at Musian with eyes full of admiration, and said, "I didn't expect Mr. Mu to actually know Senior Sister Lan. We just met by chance." Musian felt complicated. At this time, Lin Qiu suddenly saw a paper crane flying from nowhere in mid-air, and couldn't help but wonder, "What is that?" Musian also looked up and saw a paper crane resting lightly on his hand in the distance. Opening the paper crane, the sentence above emerged into view. Mr. Mew, Miss Lin's Aurora necklace is very beautiful. Cherish it? Musian's face suddenly became dull. Facts have proved that your senior sister is your senior sister. This woman is really terrifyingly smart. If you marry her in the future, no small move will escape her eyes. With helplessness and emotion in his heart, Mu Jian sent Lin Qiu away and dragged his tired body back to Tianhe Garden. In the past, he was positioned as a supporting villain, and he certainly had the brains and skills, but the problem now is, every fish raised in the fish pond seems to be the protagonist. The so-called protagonist is naturally a coexistence of talent, brains, and luck, at least that's how it is in this world. In addition, there are several leaders who plan to raise his fish in his fish pond. Fortunately, Fairy Yao Meng didn't seem to have any intention of dragging him, the owner of the fish pond, into the pond, otherwise his actions would probably become more and more difficult in the future. After walking into the kitchen to prepare some meat buns for midnight snack, Musian came to the door of Lin Ling's room, which had nothing to do with him. Opening the door, I happened to see the silver-haired beauty curled up on the bed with a round butt. Her hair was slightly messy, and her light golden eyes, as bright as gems, peered at Musian through the messy hair, with expectation in her eyes. "Sister Lin Ling, what's going on?" Musian asked. This was the first time he saw Lin Ling showing such an expression. In the past, when he saw him bringing supper, he would have been eager to come over. Lin Ling said softly. "Sorry, I didn't understand." Musian walked to Ziotan and sat down. He placed the plate with meat buns next to him and glanced at her. What was Sister Lin Ling talking about just now? Lin Ling raised a wooden board with several big words on it. "After the Immortal Ascension Conference is over, I will hand over the second heavenly energy to you." Musian was stunned for a moment. Isn't it said that a person can only have one heavenly energy? The words on the wooden board changed quietly, and a sentence appeared in front of me again. "Your body can hold several rays of heavenly energy, it just needs time." "What is the effect of the second heavenly energy?" Musian asked curiously. "His first heavenly chi is to speed up the cultivation of others, which is regarded as a god-level assistant. It is impossible that the second stream of heavenly Dao chi is also an auxiliary, right?" Lin Ling grabbed a meat bun and bit it in his mouth, and then wrote on the wooden board, "About the energy of heaven that enhances strength." Mu Jian was overjoyed and said, "Should I come find you after the Immortal Ascension Conference?" Lin Ling glanced at him and nodded slightly. After successfully feeding Miss Lin Ling, Musian returned to the room, lay on the bed, and felt a cyan light quietly appear in the room. The long skirt intertwined with green and white wraps the fairy body, outlining an exquisite and graceful curve. From the green silhouette and even the snow-white feet that had never touched the ground, it was easy to know that it was Fairy Yao Meng who had just been awakened by the vision caused by Ye Lingxian. She turned her head slightly and looked at Musian, with a faint smile in her eyes, and said, "There really was a lot of commotion today." Viewed horizontally, there are ridges and peaks, with different heights and distances. Musian looked at Yao Meng's figure and this poem came to his mind for no reason. He sat up and said with a smile, "It seems that the fairy was disturbed by that thing in the sky. Are you awake?" Yao Meng's green eyes flashed slightly, with a smile on her lips, and said, "It is extremely rare to have a birth abnormality, not to mention that it is caused by the reincarnated queen, so naturally people are concerned." The skin on her body was dyed with a silvery white light, and even her jade feet were stained by the silvery white light. "Even if I see her more than once, I will have different feelings every time I see this fairy, because the Tao practiced by Yao Meng will give people a dream-like sense of distance, but this sense of distance is uncomfortable. It makes people's hearts itch and makes them have some bold ideas." "Sister Fairy, does she know what that white light in the sky is?" Musian asked. Yao Meng shook his head and said, "Being in the Lianji sect, You are in concubine Shangyan's formation. She used the sex formation to block the secrets of heaven and the people in the sex perception of the outside world. It seems that white light is something that even the sect leader must be wary of, so why would he not hesitate to activate the sex formation? But what exactly is that? Musian frowned slightly and fell into deep thought. Yao Meng looked at him quietly, with no fluctuation in his eyes, as clear as late autumn pool water. You have been too impetuous recently, which is not good for your future practice. Her voice was calm and soft, but it seemed to have a special magic power that could calm people down no matter how impetuous they were. Musian came back to his senses and said with a smile, I have my own sense of discretion. Thank you, Sister Fairy, for your concern. Yao Meng glanced at him, raised his hand, and a Guhen appeared in his field of vision. Musian recognized it almost immediately and said, Is this the Guhen that was in the pilgrimage hall that day? He still remembered that when he entered the cave of the pilgrimage hall, as soon as he heard the sound of the Guhen, he felt instantly at peace and felt that the years had passed. She sat down elegantly with one leg in front of the Guhen, and her slender jade fingers gently touched the Guhen. At this time, the sound of the piano sounded, gentle and melodious, like the warm summer wind blowing into the heart, touching people's heartstrings, as if it has a magical power that can calm people's complex moods. No, it would be better to say that there is indeed magic in it, or aura. This should also be the Tao of Yaokai Holy Land, which can make people calm down. Musian looked at the fairy who seemed to be shrouded in mist and the faintly beautiful face, and felt that his mood gradually calmed down. He closed his eyes slightly and listened quietly to the sound of the Guhen. Until an unknown amount of time passed, when the music of the Guhen ended, Musian seemed to have not recovered from the previous music, and still had his eyes slightly closed. Have you calmed down now? A soft voice with fairy charm came to his ears, which brought Musian back to reality from the sound of the piano just now. He opened his eyes and saw the beauty not far in front of him gently kissing her. Staring at him, his eyes were as clear as gems. Musian was deep in thought, quietly got out of bed and came to her side. Thank you, I have calmed down a lot now. Musian thanked him sincerely. The Guhen song just now obviously has a special fairy charm, which can make people feel calmer. For monks, dry practice that lasts for hundreds or thousands of days often causes mental problems, but such a Guhen can repair impetuous moods. Looking at Yao Meng's stunningly beautiful profile, Musian sat beside her and held one of her cold hands. The Immortal Ascension Conference is coming soon, and I'm afraid I won't have time to communicate with the fairies during that period, so I think tonight. Musian expressed his thoughts tactfully. And it can also help Bawangmeng to accumulate spiritual energy and evolve as soon as possible. After all, it is a first-level skill brought by Yao Meng's innate Taoist fetus. The ability of Bawangmeng to skill is extremely exaggerated, and it can even evolve. It's no wonder that the saints of Yaokai throughout the ages have been pursued by countless people. Seeing that Yao Meng didn't answer, Musian became bolder and took the initiative to put his arms around the beauty's slender waist. Yao Meng's flawless and beautiful face seemed to have a faint blush as she stared at him. Such a fairy is usually difficult to get in touch with, but once she falls in love, she becomes even more attractive. Musian picked her up and was about to go back to bed with her jade feet dangling. At this time, looking at the jade feet dangling in front of him, he seemed to have thought of something, and his steps paused slightly. Under Yao Meng's gaze, Musian leaned close to her ear and said, Fairy sister, how about doing something more romantic before that? Yao Meng curled up her legs and was stared at from above. For the first time, a hint of shyness flashed in her calm eyes. She said, What are you talking about? It was written in the book I read in Sister Mengro's room before. It's not that I want to do this. Musian explained first, then leaned close to her ear and whispered something. Yao Meng was stunned for a moment, as if she didn't expect that someone would enjoy this. But, it seems that it's not impossible. Feeling Musian's expectant eyes, Yao Meng's eyes gradually jumped with a hint of joy, and her beautiful voice sounded vaguely in the room. Lie down on the ground. Late at night. Bairuoxi slowly opened his eyes and woke up from the state of meditation. It wasn't that the training was over, but she just heard the sound of the zither in Musian's room, which made her a little concerned. And it stands to reason that Mu Lang should have come back. Bairuoxi got up from the bed, stepped on the exquisite embroidered shoes and left the room, stopping in front of the next room not far away. Looking at the faintly lit candlelight inside, hesitating for a moment, raised his hand and was about to push open the door. "What do you want, Miss Bai?" At this time, Yao Meng's voice suddenly sounded from the room. Bairuoxi paused and said, "I just heard the sound of the zither, so I came to see, so it was Senior Kingdi in there. He asked me for some questions about the 8 desolate dream map today, and it may take some time." Yao Meng touched her lips lightly with her fingertips, looked down at the boy on the ground, her eyes moved, but the corners of her mouth outlined a very beautiful arc, and said softly, "You should come to him tomorrow." The next day, early morning. On the spacious and soft brocade couch, Musian slowly opened his eyes and yawned in boredom. He tilted his head slightly, but found that the beauty in his arms last night had disappeared today. Musian used his spiritual sense to scan the natural furnace, and indeed detected her presence in the natural furnace. Fairy sister is really ruthless. She left after being satisfied, and didn't even say hello to me, Musian complained in his heart, got off the bed, stretched his waist lazily, put on his clothes silently, and left the room. The white light last night has completely disappeared, as if it had never appeared. There is already a thick layer of snow on the ground, and heavy snow is falling in the sky. "Are you going to find her today?" A cold and pleasant voice suddenly came from the side. Even if he didn't look back, Musian knew that this was his arrogant maid. "Go today. I don't like to drag things out. It's better to deal with them earlier," Musian said with a smile. "Aren't you worried that she will refuse to see you?" Wei Mengru raised her eyebrows slightly. "Why would she refuse to see me?" Musian looked sideways. "Regina wants to use me to achieve her goal, and I also want to use her to achieve my goal. Our interests are the same." Musian paused and said, "But before that, I need you to lend me something." "What?" Wei Mengru said. Musian pointed to Wei Mengru's full and upright chest. Feeling the increasingly contemptuous eyes of the maid, Musian no longer kept it a secret and smiled, "I need bronze fragments. The bronze fragments hanging on your chest may be the cause of the black fog, and the black fog is a secret technique of the southern wilderness that can block its own breath and block the secrets of heaven. Maybe, I can find the answer from Regina today." Warm TI. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 264. There are several caves on the north bank of the Lianji sect, all located in the Gi Hall. The group from the southern wasteland stayed in this hall temporarily. Musian came to the Gi Hall and found the pavilion where Regina lived. Just as he was about to step into it, an old man in a grey robe quietly stopped him at the door. Gulban, one of the elders in the southern wasteland holy temple, was also the one accompanying this time to protect the saint and the Son of God. In fact, in terms of status, Nigeti, as the Son of God, is naturally no lower than Regina, but the latter's physique and even the power behind him are much higher than Nigeti, so there is a superior subordinate relationship between the two like that day. "Friend Mu, do you have something to do?" The old man looked at Musian with a smile, and his tone sounded very kind. Although he was deeply skeptical about what Regina said that day, that Musian could make her soul-reading body fully evolve, he would pay enough attention to Musian even if there was only a little possibility. "I want to talk to Miss Regina about something. Please help me tell her." Musian raised his hands and clasped his fists. "Miss, there are guests here today. I will take you to the side hall to rest for a while," Gulban said, and then glanced at the yellow-skirted maid next to Musian without leaving a trace. Although he restrained his own aura, he was a cultivator in the Return to Void realm after all, so he could naturally see Wei Mengru's realm and grade. It is rumored that the maid next to Musian has amazing talent. Today, it seems that she is indeed amazing. It will be a great obstacle to the Ascension Conference. Musian followed Gulban into the quiet pavilion, sat down in the side hall, and waited for Regina's affairs to be dealt with. I will not disturb Mr. Mew here. I will let Miss come over later, Gulban said simply, and then left the side hall. Musian was not polite. His eyes wandered around the side hall carelessly, and his thoughts were scattered. Wei Mengru stood quietly beside Musian, wearing a beautiful long dress with a yellow background and embroidered lavender patterns. Although she had a beautiful face that was no less than that of a great beauty, her presence was always very low, so much so that Musian once thought that Wei Mengru's hiding would weaken her own presence, making people subconsciously forget her existence. Do you really think she will tell you the secrets of the southern wilderness? Wei Mengru suddenly asked in a low voice. Musian shook his head and said, I have confidence, but it doesn't mean I can really do it, but it's better than doing nothing. Let's sit down and rest for a while before she comes. However, Wei Mengru just shook her head and said lightly, I can just stand. Sister Mengru, are you embarrassed to sit with me? Are you shy? Musian pinched his chin and looked at the maid, thinking. Wei Mengru glanced at Musian with disdain and said coldly, you worked hard day and night yesterday, so you should rest more and talk less. Such a disdainful look may not be appropriate for other beauties, but for Wei Mengru, it is simply a great plus. Musian retracted his gaze, stopped teasing the maid, and took out an exquisitely crafted light blue necklace from his arms. The Aurora necklace, which was given to him by Lin Qiu not long ago, seems to be able to block his own breath and secrets to a certain extent, and also has the effect of clearing the heart. However, if you meet someone who is too charming, the effect may not be so good. For example, the sexy and hot queen of the demon world. Sister Mengru, come to me. Musian looked at the necklace in his hand and suddenly said. Wei Mengru hesitated for a moment and looked at Musian a few times. What are you doing? Just come over. Are you afraid that I will eat you? Musian said. Wei Mengru hesitated for a while, and finally came to Musian. Musian stood up, took off the necklace, and then took 2 steps forward and put it on Wei Mengru's neck. What is this? She couldn't help but look up at Musian. Because Musian's action of putting the necklace on the maid made the distance between the two quite close, she could see Musian's face almost as soon as she looked up. But Wei Mengru's eyes were always clear and cold, as if she had never been shy. Musian looked up and down for a few times and smiled, not bad, it suits you very well. Isn't this something given to you by others? Wei Mengru frowned slightly. Then, looking at the smile on Musian's face, she seemed to understand something quickly and whispered, block the secrets of heaven. Judging from Musian's guess yesterday, Wei Mengru's bad luck is probably because the rules of heaven and earth do not allow a heretic like her to exist, so the heaven has sent down a punishment from heaven. And blocking the secrets of heaven is the most direct and effective way to solve bad luck. The bronze fragment on Wei Mengru's chest, and even the Aurora necklace that Musian had just put on her neck, had similar abilities. Wei Mengru closed her eyes slightly, her spiritual consciousness swept over her body, and then quickly shook her head. The second necklace that shields the secrets of heaven has no effect. It seems that we still have to find another way, Musian whispered to himself. Wei Mengru took off the Aurora necklace and was about to return it to Musian. At this time, she suddenly heard the sound coming from the Aurora necklace. It was an extremely crisp and pleasant female voice. The voice left by Lin Qiu in the Aurora necklace. Seeing Wei Mengru holding the necklace in her hand suspended in mid-air, and looking at him with a strange look in her eyes, Musian couldn't help but ask curiously, what's wrong? Wei Mengru quickly came back to her senses, looked at Musian meaningfully, shook her head gently, and said softly, it's okay. She returned the Aurora necklace to Musian. It seems that her young master doesn't know about this yet. But it's naturally a girl's heart. Maybe Lin Qiu hopes that Musian will find the words she left in the necklace himself. She didn't remind him, just continue to be a bystander. The second necklace didn't work on Wei Mengru, so Musian put the Aurora necklace back on his neck, feeling the active breath coming from the necklace, and couldn't help but secretly sigh at Lin Qiu's generosity again. At this time, Musian felt the call of the spirit of the purple lightning holy ring on his finger. He could not help but touch the ring on his hand gently, and said to himself, the necklace is powerful, and you are also powerful. But if Sister Lingxian uses the chain of desolate time to tie me up again in the future, you must remember that I am your master, and don't betray me at the critical moment. The purple lightning holy ring can block a fatal attack from others at a critical moment. As long as the realms of both parties are not particularly different, this spirit ring will be of great help in the subsequent Ascension Conference. Musian leaned back in his chair and raised his hand to open his personal interface. He wanted to see if there were any new titles or the like when his relationship with Ye Lingxian had become so close in the past 2 days. After a rough glance and confirming that there were no new titles, Musian's eyes fell on the title of Natural Taoist Fetus, and there was a little more thoughtfulness in his eyes. Musian had experienced this physique several times in the past with Fairy Yao Meng. Last night, he also experienced the beauty of Yao Meng's delicate body, but before the experience, he played some more romantic things. After all, although the fairy has a good figure, what attracts Musian the most is the pair of exquisite jade feet like rare jade. Even now, thinking about it, it still makes people fascinated. It's not that I have a strange hobby, but the fairy is too tempting, and her natural Taoist fetus can also contribute spiritual energy to my 8 desolate dream map. Everyone naturally has XP, but XP is based on the other person being a beauty. While explaining in his mind, Musian silently looked at the introduction behind this physique, born with the rare Taoist fetus. Those who practice dual cultivation with it can obtain a first-grade practice that fits themselves, and the practice can evolve. Before, I was busy with other things and had no time to take care of this physique, but even seeing this title at this moment, Musian still felt mixed emotions. It should be the physique of the Yaokai saint, but it happened to me, a man. What's going on? But he is the destined heroine, so it's not surprising that he has a natural fetus. Just thinking about this, a maid in a long skirt came into the side hall. Seeing the two people in the side hall, she bowed slightly and said, Mr. Mu, Miss Wei, the saint invites you. It seems that the conversation with Regina is over. Musian stood up and stretched his waist, followed the maid and left the side hall. Miss Regina, I hope you can consider my proposal later. If you join forces with me and the saint, you can't say that you can win the first place in the Ascension Conference, but at least you and I can guarantee a place. In the hall, the young man in a Confucian robe smiled gently and said again, there are at least thousands of people who want to participate in the Ascension Conference this time, but in the end, there are probably less than 100 people who can really make it to the finals in the Lianji section. You and I are both cultivators outside Dongzhou, and it is inevitable that we will be excluded by others. Not far from the young man, Regina, wearing a complicated and gorgeous enchanting red dress, sat on a chair, seemingly thinking about the proposal of this guest today. The World Sea is separated from Dongzhou and the Demon Realm. There are countless islands on the sea, and some of them are inhabited by cultivators from ancient times. In the past, there were countless large-scale wars between cultivators and demon cultivators, and the World Sea was caught in the middle, but it was always calm. On the one hand, it was because the sea area was extremely mysterious and would limit the cultivation of cultivators. On the other hand, it is because there are forces in the World Sea that are enough to make people fear. The people who came to talk to the saint of the southern wilderness this time are the saint and the son of the saint from the top forces in the World Sea. I will consider your proposal and give you a reply in the next 2 days, Regina said. The first location of this Ascension Conference was set in the Wuja of Dongzhou, and there will be huge tests in the Wuja. Usually, among thousands of cultivators, only 100 people can finally qualify for the Ascension Conference. Of course, it is not that the probability of passing is high with more people. Sometimes, lone travelers can pass the test of the Wuja at the fastest speed and qualify for the Ascension Conference. Of course, these two people are geniuses from the World Sea. If they cooperate with them, it will be beneficial without disadvantages. But if possible, she hopes to cooperate with Musian. Musian's realm is not too high, but he still has many secrets and trump cards, and the speed at which the two people's feelings warm up in a dangerous environment will also be much faster. It would be best if she could help him when he is in danger. As if she thought of something interesting, Regina tapped her red mouth with her fingertips and licked her lips gently. Thinking about it this way, this Immortal Ascension Conference is quite exciting. However, the premise is that you can meet Musian in the martial arts world. The martial world area is quite vast, and if you step into it, you will be randomly transported to a certain area by the formation, and the formation will protect you from a fatal injury. But after that, that person defaulted to losing the qualifications for the Immortal Ascension Conference and would be rumored out of the martial arts world. After seeing the two of them off, Regina held her cheeks in her hands, caressed her black silk with her fingertips, and hooked her delicate cloud-embroidered shoes on her toes, waiting for Musian's arrival. On the other side, after the two people from World Sea left the hall, they happened to see two slightly unfamiliar faces not far ahead coming into view. The young man had a jade-like face and was dressed in a black and gold robe. He was full of aristocratic aura. Although the maid beside him deliberately restrained her aura, her charming appearance was still impressive. Musian smiled and nodded at the two of them, and then walked into the hall with Wei Mengru. The saint, who was wearing a light blue dress and seemed to be untainted by the world, looked sideways slightly, with a bit of doubt in her eyes. Does it look like they are master and slave? However, it is quite rare that the master's realm is so much lower than that of the maid. The Holy Son from the World Sea looked at Wei Mengru's leaving figure with a dignified look in his eyes. Even as proud as he was, when he saw the maid in the yellow skirt, he still felt that the other party's strength was unfathomable, and he didn't have much confidence in a fight. The man next to her is a little weird at this time. The calm and melodious voice of the woman in the blue dress sounded softly. If I remember correctly, I saw this person in Qingyang Palace a few days ago. His name seems to be Musian. The young man muttered, "Do you want to investigate?" The woman in the blue dress shook her head and said calmly, "Don't forget why you and I came to Dongzhou this time. Finding the original witch is the key. Don't make trouble for a woman." The young man smiled lightly and said, "It's just a casual comment. If a fourth-level god-refining monk really wants to solve it, he can just wait until the Immortal Ascension Conference starts." But the maid next to him needs to pay attention, he continued. "The original witch, she is the true master of the World Sea. The divination of the great elder of the clan shows that the original witch may not be dead yet, but has some physical problems, and is now in Dongzhou. In this Ascension Conference, the 3 emperor-level medicinal herbs are certainly tempting, but to them, what is really important is the original witch who may be sleeping somewhere in the East Continent. If she can be awakened, even if the Immortal Ascension Conference fails in the end, it will be considered a worthwhile trip. What's more, they don't think they will lose." In the hall, Musian entered the hall and saw the saintess of the southern wilderness, who was dressed seductively and charmingly, but had a pure and delicate temperament. She wore a coquettish red dress, dotted with white patterns, and had a charm that blended purity and charm. After Regina asked the maid to watch the tea, she glanced at the maid in yellow skirt standing quietly in front of the door and smiled, "Is Mr. Mu planning to complete the contract in advance?" She said that, but in fact Regina knew it well. Musian came to see her, maybe there was something else going on. After all, if Musian really planned to complete the contract ahead of schedule, he would not have brought his maid here today. It seems that she is very anxious to complete the evolution of the soul-reading body. Musian smiled and said, it is indeed related to this matter. Regina put her left leg on her right leg, her dangling toes paused slightly, and stared at Musian, with a smile on her lips and a soft and pleasant voice. In that case, why are you still bringing a maid? Could it be? Intentionally or unintentionally, she looked at the maid in yellow skirt standing in front of the door. Musian shook his head and smiled, I came to see Miss Regina this time. I mainly want to ask you something. When Regina heard this, her eyes that were originally filled with some expectation suddenly became a little bit calmer, and she looked at Musian. Mr. Mew, it's okay to just say it. The voice suddenly became much calmer. Knowing that it's not that simple, how could Musian take the initiative to mention the contract when the Immortal Ascension Conference was about to begin? I was born with a strange phenomenon last night, which caused the luck of the monks in the sect to emerge. I heard that there is a secret technique in the southern wilderness that can block the secrets of heaven and hide one's own aura, so I want to know about it from Miss Regina. When Musian said this, a trace of surprise appeared on Regina's cold and jade-like face, and she said, young Master Mew knows a lot of things. Before, someone in your southern wilderness secretly plotted to kill me. How could I not know about it? Musian said with a smile. His decisions are all based on his own opinions. I don't know about this, Regina said in a soft voice. If Mr. Mew does mind, I can make up for it with spiritual stones after this. Regina lowered her eyes, and the white skin of her thighs was vaguely revealed under the tulle of the red dress. She sighed softly. However, the shielding secret you mentioned is an untold secret of the southern wilderness, and I have it in my hand. There are no samples. However, there are exceptions to everything. Before Musian could speak, Regina raised her head, with a charming smile on her beautiful face. If Mr. Mew can follow me to the southern wilderness in the future, I will be the god of the southern wilderness. Make the decision and tell you the secret. If you want any cultivation resources in the future, I can give them to you. Musian raised his eyebrows and smiled. It seems that Miss Regina has a high status in the southern wilds. But I'm sorry, I can't go back with you. Then there's nothing to say about this matter. Mr. Mew, please don't make things difficult for a weak woman like me. Regina's attitude immediately became cold. Miss Regina, don't rush to judge. Musian stretched out his hand and placed it on Regina's leg, covering her right hand. I can't go back to the southern wilds with you, but I have something here that Miss Regina will definitely be interested in. Regina's eyes flashed slightly, staring at Musian. Mr. Mew, please tell me. Natural Tau fetus. Warm TI. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 265. Logically speaking, the innate Taoist fetus is the physique of the Yaokai saints of all ages. Those who practice it can comprehend a first-grade skill through the innate Taoist fetus. And the most exaggerated thing is that this level of skill can still evolve. However, its evolution is extremely difficult and is a bottomless pit. Of course, even if it is difficult to achieve evolution, the value of the first-level skills is enough to make 99% of Juzhu, and even those beauties of heaven, excited. Even if it requires double cultivation to obtain it, it will still attract the attention of countless female cultivators. If what Musian said is true, let alone the secret technique of the southern wilderness, even adding an emperor-level medicinal plant is worth it. But the problem now is that what Musian said may not be true. Regina stared at him, with suspicion and disbelief in her beautiful eyes that were all-encompassing, and said, if I remember correctly, being born with a Taoist fetus is a physique that only the saints of Yaokai in the past have. Mr. Mew, it's better not to joke. When he said this, his delicate hand took it out of Musian's palm without leaving any trace. Musian didn't mind, and showed a bright smile. "Miss Regina, you think I came to you specially to make a deal, and I would make fun of you at this time." Regina bit her lower lip, stared at Musian with a pair of moist and tender eyes, and said, "Of course I want to believe Mr. Mew, and I also intend to tell you the secret technique of the southern wilderness. However, Mr. Mew doesn't seem to be the same. There is no sincerity. The born Taoist fetus is the physique of the Yaokai saint. Almost all the monks in Kyushu know this." She paused. "Or is Mr. Mew also a saint of Yaokai?" When she said this, Regina's tone became more joking, which gradually restored the somewhat unharmonious atmosphere just now. This is also one of Regina's methods. Her beautiful and picturesque appearance, coupled with her crisp and melodious voice and her soft and delicate temperament, will subconsciously make the men around her relax their vigilance. Once you relax your vigilance, you will fall into the tenderness and sweetness woven by this southern wilderness saint and be unable to extricate yourself. Miss Regina, since you have heard about the innate Taoist constitution of the Yaokai saint, have you ever thought about why there is no holy sun in the Yaokai Holy Land?" Musian asked unhurriedly. Regina stared at Musian calmly with her beautiful eyes, and said calmly, "Could it be that young Master Mew is the holy son of Yaokai?" "I am not the holy son, but you should have heard about the rebirth of the Qing Emperor some time ago," Musian said calmly. Regina's eyes flickered slightly. She looked at Musian and said nothing. "A few days ago, the Qing Emperor was reborn and condensed into an immortal body, causing chaos in Kyushu. After that, there were monks in the southern wilderness who were good at making decisions and secretly prevented the rebirth of the Qing Emperor. The three superior southern wilderness gods knew about this, but they just turned a blind eye and used it as a test. When the Qing Emperor returned to Yaokai, it was supposed to be the time when the cauldron had not yet condensed, but he ended up suppressing several ancient powerful men who secretly attacked Yaokai that night. This news caused a stir in Dongzhou at that time. Until now, no one has guessed the reason for this. They can only attribute it to the Qing Emperor's unparalleled grace and ability to burn his potential when encountering difficulties. After Regina learned about Musian's physique, she vaguely guessed that the most magnificent fairy in the eyes of the world would probably be with Musian when she returned to Yaokai that night. "I got part of the spiritual energy in the Tian Dao fetus, and it is now stored in the Tian furnace," Musian said. Regina's breathing stagnated slightly, and she raised her head suddenly. Her gorgeous eyes that seemed to be changing gradually lit up with a luster of expectation. "Mr. Mew, do you really mean what you said? If this is the case, it can explain why Musian said that he would trade the innate Tao fetus. Even though Musian was not born with a Taoist physique, he probably integrated the Taoist physique into the Tian furnace through the Tian furnace. Although he didn't know whether Tiansheng furnace had this ability, but as Musian said, it was impossible for him to use this kind of thing to make her happy. If he is really born with Taoism." Regina sat with her round, snow-white slender legs crossed, playing with a strand of hair with her fingertips, secretly weighing the pros and cons. The secret technique of southern wilderness is of great value because it involves the cultivation system of southern wilderness. Only a few people know this secret technique. If this secret technique is given to Musian. At this time, she suddenly felt her cold little hand being held by an unfamiliar hand. When she came to her senses, she raised her head and looked up, only to see a gentle smile on the young man's handsome face. "Isn't Miss Regina reading souls? You can see for yourself whether it is true or not." Musian released the aura that was originally contained in the Tian furnace cauldron. After all this time, the spiritual energy in the Tian furnace cauldron is different from the past. At this moment, it exudes a charming medicinal fragrance, which has a charm that makes people intoxicated. How come this guy's natural cauldron has so much more spiritual energy than his own cauldron? This is at least a natural cauldron in the Return to Void realm. Regina gave Musian a strange look. At this moment, in Regina's eyes, Musian's natural furnace cauldron appeared in front of her eyes without reservation. Although she could not see the appearance of the natural furnace cauldron, her soul reading could clearly see what was inside the cauldron. The way spiritual energy flows, and what exactly is hidden in the natural furnace. And this glance also made Regina's eyes suddenly freeze on Musian's body, and she remained silent for a long time. Almost at the same time, the blue-dressed beauty who had previously negotiated with Regina paused slightly. She had a noble temperament, but when she turned her head to look at the pavilion where Regina was, there was a little more doubt in her eyes. "What's wrong?" the Holy Son who came from the world sea asked. The blue-dressed beauty looked at Gu Hua in surprise. "Don't you feel that the spiritual energy emanating from the place where Regina lives is a little special? Such a rich spiritual energy, this Holy Son didn't even notice it? It stands to reason that in terms of spiritual energy, Gu Hua should be on par with her." "I didn't feel anything unusual. Could it be caused by Regina's practice?" Gu Hua asked doubtfully. The blue-skirted beauty took a deep look at the villa where Regina lived, and soon shook her head and said, "No, it's okay. Go back first." On the other side, Musian recollected the spiritual energy of the natural furnace, and immediately looked up at the beauty in the southern wilderness, and smiled. "Miss Regina, I wonder what you think about it." Regina still stared at Musian in doubt, and it was unknown how long it took before she came back to her senses from her thoughts just now. "It seems that what Mr. Mu said is indeed true. You are indeed a natural Taoist fetus," Regina said slowly, and the majesty of a saint was revealed between her beautiful eyebrows. "However, the secret arts of the southern wilderness involve too many things. Please allow me to think about it again. I will give you an answer before the Ascension Conference begins," she said again. When she said this, her eyes inadvertently glanced at Musian. Musian was not dissatisfied or disappointed by Regina's words. He just smiled and said, "In that case, Miss Regina, please think about it carefully first. However, I still hope you can reply to me as soon as possible. If not, I can only ask other people." "It seems that he really needs the secret technique of shielding the secrets of heaven," Regina smiled. "I know, I will reply to you as soon as possible." Musian smiled slightly, and then changed the subject lightly. "The two people just now seem to be from the world sea from their clothes?" Regina nodded slightly. "They want to invite me to cooperate. If we happen to meet in the martial world during this Ascension Conference, we can take care of each other. If you and I are destined to meet in the martial world in the future, I hope Mr. Mu will not despise me," Regina said in a pleasant and gentle voice. "Miss Regina's strength is unfathomable. It's fine if you don't despise my low strength, but how dare I despise you?" Musian smiled. "If I meet you at that time, we have to take care of each other." Window. Tabula equals window. Tabula. Tabula.push, mode, thumbs feed -01, container, tabula below article feed, placement, below article feed, target. Type, mix. Regina narrowed her beautiful eyes slightly and smiled sweetly. "Of course. I am used to hearing flattery from others, but when it comes from Musian's mouth, it still makes people feel a little good." After chatting with Regina in the hall for a while, Musian stood up and said goodbye to Regina. And not long after Musian left, an old man quietly walked into the hall and saw the girl sitting alone on the tea chair. She sat with her legs crossed, the red skirt under her skirt revealing the white skin of her thighs, her toes hooked on the exquisite embroidered shoes, holding a teacup in her hand, her eyes slightly lowered, as if thinking about something. "Miss, he came to you before the Ascension Conference. Could it be that he planned to complete the transaction in advance?" Gulben couldn't help but ask in a low voice. Regina came back to her senses and shook her head gently. "Musian's brain is still quite good. No matter how you think about it, you know that he can't give me the reincarnation spirit before the end of the Ascension Conference. Then what is he doing here?" Regina looked sideways and said, "He wants the secret technique of the southern wilderness." Gulbin frowned slightly and said immediately, absolutely not. If the secret technique of the southern wilderness falls into the hands of an outsider, who knows what he will do with it? What on earth is Musian thinking that he actually wants my secret technique of the southern wilderness? The old man continued. The reason why the secret technique is called a secret technique is because of its secrecy and importance. Moreover, the secret technique of the southern wilderness involves the issue of the cultivation system. In the entire vast southern wilderness, there are only a few people who know this secret technique. Is he threatening to raise the price by reincarnating the spiritual energy? The old man guessed. Regina shook her head and smiled faintly. I just said that Musian is a smart man. Smart people will not do stupid things or ask stupid questions. He knows that I will not accept it even if he raises the price. Gulbin shook his head and said, no matter what, the secret technique of the southern wilderness cannot be handed over. He wants to exchange it for a first-grade technique. Regina turned her head to look at Gulbin. Her eyes were magnificent and shining like stars, and she said calmly, a first-grade technique that can evolve. This voice made Gulbin's voice stagnate, and his breathing became a little faster. Then, the first thought that flashed through his mind was absurd. There are only a few first-grade skills even if you search the entire Jizhu. Even in the Lianji sect, there may be only one or two in the library. Musian directly said first-grade skills, and it is a first-grade skill that can evolve. Just thinking about it makes people feel absurd. Miss, did you really believe this? Gulbin frowned on his old face. How could a fourth-grade cultivator of the spirit refinement have a first-grade skill? Even if there is, he has already used it himself. How could it be kept until now? And it can evolve. Would he believe it if he said it out loud? Regina glanced at Nigeti, who was hiding at the door, and said lightly, I just confirmed that Musian did not lie. The words made the old man's heartbeat slow down, and Nigeti, who was hiding at the door, widened his eyes, full of unbelievable absurdity. Then, jealousy gradually surged in his heart. A first-grade technique, if such a technique could be obtained, wouldn't it be possible to crush the cultivators of the same realm at this Ascension Conference? And this is a first-grade technique that can evolve. Musian's deal is really generous. If it were him, he would have been eager to refine such a technique. How could he use it for a trade? What do you plan to do, miss? After a long silence, Gulbin finally suppressed his inner emotions, calmed down, and asked. Such a top-grade technique, let alone Regina, even the gods in the southern wilderness would be tempted. The more powerful the existence, the more it can exert the power of the first-grade technique, not to mention that it can evolve. What will the first-grade technique look like if it goes up? Just thinking about it makes people curious and excited. He still has a lot of secrets. I have told him. Give him an answer before the Ascension Conference. Regina had a sweet smile on her beautiful face, and her green jade fingers gently rolled up a strand of fine hair and lifted it behind her ear. He came to me today, which means he really needs the southern wilderness secret technique to shield some secrets. In that case, let's wait a little longer. She smiled charmingly. Maybe he can't wait to come to me tomorrow. At this moment, Musian and Wei Mengru had just left the pavilion and were walking on the square of Gi Hall. Along the way, Wei Mengru couldn't help looking at the young man beside her several times, as if she was particularly concerned about something. Why are you staring at me, Sister Mengru? Musian finally couldn't help asking. Wei Mengru stopped and turned her head to stare into Musian's eyes. The southern wilderness secret technique is a secret that cannot be passed on, but she promised you that she would consider it carefully. How did you persuade Regina? Logically speaking, Regina should have rejected Musian outright for this kind of secret technique involving the secrets of the southern wilderness, but the other party didn't know why she gave in. There is no doubt that Musian proposed a condition that made Regina's heart beat and even couldn't refuse. But what exactly did Musian take as a bargain? The maid couldn't figure it out. Don't worry, anyway, I didn't do anything against human ethics. I just gave her a condition that she couldn't refuse. Musian smiled and comforted. If the genders of the scene were swapped, the comments would probably exceed 10,000. For the sake of the protagonist, the female protagonist, Musian had to propose a physical trade to the blonde and small-breasted saint of the southern wilderness, and then faced the protagonist's concerns and shook her head and smiled reluctantly to show that it was okay. The only difference is that all of this was Musian's plan, and there was no coercion from Regina. However, Regina shouldn't accept my conditions so quickly, Musian continued. Wei Mengru asked doubtfully, how do you know? We took the initiative to find her, which means we have something to ask of her. Musian looked up at the monks flying in the air in the Gi Hall, and admired the graceful figure of the blue-skirted woman who had just left not long ago. In negotiations, the first use of the illusion of tolerance can be exchanged for the other party's concessions. The more realistic this tolerance is, the more concessions you may get in return. If I were Regina, I would take this opportunity to get more benefits, my favor, or... Regina has always wanted to fully evolve her soul-reading body before the Ascension Conference begins, but she knows that Musian will not agree. But this transaction will be an opportunity for her. For example, when Tiansheng Daotai exchanges the secret art of Nanhuang, an additional condition is added, to allow her physique to be fully evolved before the Ascension Conference begins. You already have a way. Wei Mengru glanced at Musian, and seeing the smile on his face at this moment, she knew what he was thinking. The secret art of shielding the secret of heaven is not only in Nanhuang. They don't know that what we want to know is the black fog, but they just think that we want to shield the secret art of heaven, Musian said. So, as long as Miss Regina knows that the southern wilderness secret art is not a necessity, but a substitute, the deal will be done. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 266. The next day, evening. Regina was practicing in seclusion in her room, waiting for Musian to lose patience and come to her. At this time, there was a sudden knock on the door. Regina raised her head slightly and said calmly, "Come in." Pushing the door open, looking at the old man standing at the door, Regina's eyes showed a hint of doubt and said, "Gerben, what can I do for you?" Musian went to see Tang Sophie, the saint of the world sea, today, Gerben said in a deep voice. Musian went to find the saint of the world sea? Regina couldn't help but have a little doubt in her eyes. What is he doing with people from the sea of world? They should not know each other. Gerben pondered for a moment and said, I have heard in the past that there is also a secret technique in the world sea, which is related to shielding the secrets of heaven. Could it be? Regina was stunned for a moment, then seemed to react, bit her lower lip lightly, and said angrily, "What a wanton man! Doesn't that guy Musian have a Taoist companion? He actually went to find another woman to make a deal with when he had already made a deal with her." "Miss, what should we do now?" Gerben's old brows frowned, and there was a bit of confusion in his cloudy eyes. The secret skills of southern wilderness cannot be revealed, but the other party brought out a first-grade skill, and even a first-grade skill that can evolve, not to mention Regina. Even the gods in southern wilderness would be moved. A first-grade skill has such value. Regina took a gentle breath and exhaled slowly. "Have someone ask him to come over." She looked up at Gerben and said quietly, "Just say that I agree to the deal he proposed." Gi Palace. Musian came to the villa where Regina lived on the invitation. At this moment, he closed his eyes slightly and felt the black mist surrounding him. The secret technique of southern wilderness is to use this black mist to cover one's body, completely shielding one's own aura and even the secret of heaven. At this moment, this southern wilderness secret technique has been imprinted in Musian's mind. Musian slowly opened his eyes. "Happy cooperation, Miss Regina." He raised his head and looked at the blonde girl with a pretty face covered with frost, with the same gentle smile as always on his face. He didn't actually go to find anyone from the Sea of World. He just went to hang out with the saint of the Sea of World, but he didn't even talk to her. But just that, the drama is enough. Mr. Mew, don't forget that there is more than one transaction between you and me. I hope you can cherish yourself. Before that, Regina's face was cold, her lips were pressed tightly, and she stared at Musian faintly. Her original trading plan was to exchange Southern Wilderness secret techniques for first-grade skills, and at the same time, she made Musian promise to conduct the transaction before the Immortal Ascension Conference began. As a result, Musian went to find people in the Sea of World today. This made people a little uneasy. If the people on the other side of the World Sea finally agree to Musian's deal, the matter of the Tiansheng furnace will be exposed to other female cultivators. This is very detrimental to her. We can no longer continue to create extraneous matters. Musian raised his fingertips, looked at the black mist lingering in his hands, and smiled. Miss Regina, please rest assured, I will never break my promise. I will come find you after the Immortal Ascension Conference is over. Regina looked at Musian, who stood up to leave, and suddenly said, Mr. Mew is not willing to exchange first-grade skills for secret skills, just for the luck of a maid. Musian waved his hand and walked out of the hall without looking back, just flying his sword in the direction of Lianji Peak. He wanted to borrow a test tablet from Lan Mulian and test whether Wei Mengru's bad luck would change after applying the Southern Wilderness secret technique to Wei Mengru. Tianhe Garden. After Musian returned to Biwen, he walked straight into Wei Mengru's room. The maid who was meditating immediately noticed Musian's aura, so after the spiritual energy circulated in her body for a week, she slowly opened her eyes. Sister Mengru, won't I disturb you? Musian waved to her. Where have you been? Wei Mengru asked. Miss Regina is very hospitable and just received me again. Musian walked up to Wei Mengru with a smile. Then he stretched out his hand and grabbed the pendant on her chest. After taking off the bronze fragment, he sat in front of the bed, minding his own business. He gently rubbed the surface of the bronze fragment with his thumb, closed his eyes slightly, and slowly swept his spiritual consciousness over it. After Wei Mengru refined the bronze fragment before, her bad luck was partly suppressed, and this was probably related to the shielding secret contained in the bronze fragment. If this guess is correct, it means that as long as Wei Mengru can completely shield her existence and hide it from God, the bad luck will probably disappear completely. After nearly a stick of incense, Musian suddenly opened his eyes, and there was a bit of strangeness in his eyes when he looked at the bronze fragments. Wei Mengru stared at her young master and said, What did you find? This bronze fragment does have the ability to shield the secrets of heaven, and the secret method of shielding the secrets of heaven is completely consistent with the secret technique of Nanhuang. Musian raised his fingertips, and a wisp of black mist silently enveloped his body. Almost at that moment, Wei Mengru found that she seemed to be unable to see her young master's face clearly, because his body was covered by a layer of black mist, and even with the use of spiritual sense, he could not identify his identity. Wei Mengru frowned slightly and said to herself, So, this bronze fragment may have originated from the southern wilds. In ancient times, many powerful people fell for some reasons, and the world was in turmoil. When the weapons and magic weapons of those powerful people were broken, they were divided into several fragments. During this period, Zhou has undergone tens of thousands of years of evolution. Even if one of the bronze fragments fell to Dongzhou, it is not impossible. Musian played with the bronze fragment in his hand, but there was a bit of thought in his eyes. It seems that if there is a chance in the future, I have to go to the southern wilds to investigate. Musian quickly gathered his thoughts and reached out to grab Wei Mengru's cold and soft little hand. Before the maid spoke, she noticed that the black mist that originally covered Musian was slowly covering her body. The secret technique of the southern wilds can hide the caster and the people around him in it, and during the period of the black mist, others cannot deduce anything about the caster. Musian explained. In a sense, this southern wilderness secret art is quite compatible with Wei Mengru. If her concealment ability is combined with the southern wilderness secret art, People with higher realms than Wei Mengru may not be able to detect her existence. It's just a pity that according to Regina's meaning, this secret art can only be handed over to a designated person by each generation of saints. Now she has handed this secret art to Musian, and Musian can no longer teach it to others. Otherwise, Wei Mengru's strength may be improved a lot. The black fog enveloped the two of them, and the surrounding environment gradually became dark. Musian took out the test tablet that he had borrowed from senior sister Lan before, enlarged it with a spell, glanced at Wei Mengru and said, "Sister Mengru, test your luck now." If Yuzian's previous guess was correct, then after blocking the secret of heaven, does it mean that Wei Mengru's bad luck will also be reduced? Wei Mengru stretched out a slightly cool jade hand from her thin sleeves, and her palm touched the stone tablet. A wisp of spiritual energy was injected into the stone tablet, and the stone tablet lit up a faint light. Then, a ray of black light gradually appeared in the field of vision. In just a few seconds, the stone tablet lit up with a strange and deep black light. But this time, the black light was obviously not as exaggerated as in the past test in Tianqian City. Musian and Wei Mengru looked at each other, and the latter's eyes quickly returned to the stone tablet, whispering to herself, "Bad luck has become much weaker. This shows that this route is correct. We are now in the black fog of the southern wilderness secret art, which blocks some of the secrets of heaven, so the restrictions of heaven on you are also reduced a lot," Musian said. He then raised his head and looked at the black light emerging on the stone tablet, and suddenly doubted, "Sister Mengru, do you feel that this black light is like a human figure?" Wei Mengru raised her head and stared. Just as Musian said, the light on the test tablet seemed to outline a very vague human figure. It was a very blurry figure, but it seemed to be full of some kind of magic. When people saw this figure for the first time, they felt an indescribable palpitation. Crack. At this moment, a crisp and pleasant cracking sound suddenly came from the test monument. Musian subconsciously looked up, but only saw a crack on the test monument. Then, cracking sounds rang out in the room, and dense spiderweb-like cracks appeared on the stone monument. "Be careful!" Musian's eyes suddenly widened, and he stepped forward and bent down to protect Wei Mengru, with one hand on the back of her head. Wei Mengru's forehead was just against Musian's chest. Boom! The test monument exploded, and the broken stones burst out. Musian's spiritual energy also burst out, blocking the broken stones of the test monument. The whole room was filled with the smell of dust. Musian put one hand on the back of Wei Mengru's head and squinted his eyes. The test tablet had been completely shattered. Wei Mengru had no problems the last time she took the test in Tianqian City, but now there was a problem. Musian's eyes were filled with doubt. Also, who was the figure that appeared on the test tablet just now? Window. Tabula equals window. Tabula. Tabula.push, mode, thumbs feed -01, container, tabula below article feed, placement, below article feed, target. Type, mix. Just as Musian was thinking about these things, he suddenly felt a soft breath coming from his chest. After a moment, Wei Mengru opened her small red lips slightly, and said in a pleasant voice as calm as ice cubes falling into a water cup, "Can you let go?" Musian came back to his senses and looked down at the maid who was held in his arms with one hand. Her face was as cold as ever, and her lips were tightly pursed, as if she had never had any emotional fluctuations. Musian was about to let go of Wei Mengru, when a concerned and anxious voice suddenly came from outside the house, "Brother Mu, what happened?" It was Yechian's voice. One could clearly feel Wei Mengru's delicate body tremble slightly, and she immediately raised her hand to push Musian away. The thought of teasing arose in Musian's mind, and the corner of his mouth curled up slightly. He immediately reached out to hold the maid's cool and soft hand. When she suddenly raised her head and glared at him, he stared into her eyes and said with a smile, "There's just something wrong with the test, but it's okay, don't worry." Wei Mengru's pretty face was covered with frost. She pulled her delicate hand away from Musian's clenched palm and took 2 steps back. "What's wrong with Jian'er today?" Musian asked in a calm tone. "Sister Siyu said that she encountered some difficulties in cultivation and would like to ask you to help her solve them." Ye Qian's soft voice came. "Are you sure your sister Siyu is planning to ask me questions instead of trying to embarrass me?" Musian felt Wei Mengru's cold gaze, nodded slightly and said with a smile, "I understand, you go back first, I will be there in a moment looking for you." It just so happened that he also planned to have a good relationship with his future aunt. Even if Yesiyu didn't look for him, he planned to get in touch with that somewhat out-of-touch girl in the next few days. Ye Qian first said then hesitated for a moment, and continued, "By the way, 2 people from World C came to see my sister today, saying they wanted to test whether she was the original witch." "The original witch," Musian repeated, wondering, what is the relationship between the original witch and your sister? "The reincarnation pool seems to be transferred from the depths of the World C, and my sister happens to be the person in the restricted area who is most suitable for the reincarnation pool, so they doubt that my sister is the person they are looking for," Ye Qian said. Musian showed a thoughtful expression. "There is a lot of connection between the restricted area and the World Sea. After all, the holy water in the reincarnation pool was transferred from a treasure place deep in the World Sea. Almost everyone with bloodline in the restricted area will undergo a test and awakening ceremony in the reincarnation pool. As the person who is most suitable for the reincarnation pool, it is not surprising that Ye Lingxian is suspected by the people of the World Sea to be the reincarnation of the original witch. Brother Mu, I'm going back first." At this time, Ye Qian's voice came from outside again, which also brought Musian back to reality. Until he heard the footsteps outside gradually fading away, Musian looked relieved and said, "You really scared me to death just now, Sister Mengru." Wei Mengru gave Musian a look of disdain, and said coldly, "Next time this happens again, I don't mind letting you lie on the ground and confess your mistakes." The maid, with contemptuous eyes, wearing black and white silk stockings, the master lying on the ground, confessing his mistake to the maid. "Why does it sound so bad?" Musian apologized sincerely. "It was just a joke, I know it was wrong. There was no point in lying on the floor. If it was like Fairy Yao Men did that night, he wouldn't mind lying on the floor in this winter. Sister Mengru, please step on me." Musian raised his hand and temporarily put the pebbles from the test steel on the ground into the ring. Then he sighed and said helplessly, "This test steel is said to be quite expensive. I don't know if I can afford to pay for it." Wei Menju said, "After this, I will go to senior sister to explain this matter. She has been in the Liangyi sect for so long and has extra resources and spirit stones every month. There is no problem if she wants to pay for a test monument. You'd better keep the spirit stone. I'll just go tell my senior sister." Musian shook his head and smiled. When he was in the Sword Palace before, Musian, the unscrupulous planner, got a lot of spiritual stones from the Krypton gold, so it was natural to pay for a test monument. What's more, Lan Mulian may not accept Musian's compensation. When Wei Mengru heard this, she could only nodded slightly. Just looking at Musian turning away, Wei Mengru's eyes were full of doubts. Who was the figure that appeared in the test monument at that time? At this moment, in Dexon Garden, the Saint Tang Sophie from the Sea of the World was holding a dark box, but there was a hint of disappointment in her eyes. They thought that this forbidden saint who perfectly matched the reincarnation pool would be the person they were looking for, but unexpectedly, the box did not respond to Ye Lingxian. This also means that she is not the person they are looking for. The reincarnation water in the restricted area was guided from the depths of the World Sea. This time the two came to Dongzhou, partly for the Immortal Ascension Conference, but more importantly, to find clues to the original witch. Someone who can resonate with the reincarnation water may be the person they are looking for. but Yesiu, Ye Lingxian, and the others had just tested it, and the box left over from the original witch's past did not react to them in any way. Although she was a little disappointed, Tang Sophie still showed a soft smile, stared at the girl in purple skirt in front of her, and said softly, "Sister Lingxian, I'm really sorry for wasting a lot of your time." Ye Lingxian smiled lightly and said, "Sister Tang wants to find the former owner of World C as soon as possible. I can understand this feeling. I hope your trip to Dongzhou goes well." Next to Tang Sophie, the young man wearing a luxurious robe, Gu Hua, smiled and said, "Miss Ye is very talented. If we meet in the martial arts world in the future, please be more considerate." Ye Lingxian nodded reservedly, and her attitude was obviously much colder than when she treated Tang Sophie before. In response, Gu Hua had no choice but to shake his head, but still maintained a handsome young man's smile. Even in the past when he was in the sea of the world, he had never seen a little beauty like Ye Lingxian. Both talent and appearance were top-notch, and the pride she held up was even more attractive. But the other party's attitude was so cold now, so naturally it was difficult for him to continue talking to him. After Tang Sophie said goodbye, the two turned around and planned to leave. When the two of them turned around to leave, Ye Lingxuan's eyes suddenly brightened up behind him, and he shouted in a sweet voice, "Brother Mu, Mr. Mu." When she realized that there were outsiders, Ye Lingxian immediately changed her tune quickly, adhering to the dignity of a saint in the restricted area. Gu Hua was stunned for a moment, and subconsciously looked up, just in time to see a young man wearing a black robe with gold thread walking into the villa. His face had clear lines and a tall nose, and he looked quite handsome. "Musian," Tang Sophie was thoughtful. When she noticed Musian's gaze, she smiled and nodded. Musian smiled back, and then walked straight in the direction of Ye Lingxian. Gu Hua raised his eyebrows slightly and turned his head to glance subconsciously. The girl in the purple skirt who had been indifferent just now had a faint smile on her face. Although she maintained her usual reserve, there was obviously genuine happiness in her eyes. "It seems that your plan has failed," Tang Sophie said with a gloating smile, her lips slightly raised. She naturally knew that the Holy Sun had a very rare attraction to Ye Lingxian just after seeing her, but in less than a quarter of an hour, he fell out of love at the speed of light, which was inevitably interesting. Gu Hua quickly came to his senses, said ha and said with a smile, "They just seem to have a good relationship. When this trip to the martial arts world is over, Miss Ye will know who is more suitable for her." "Do you think you can defeat this Mr. Mu?" Tang Sophie asked with a smile. Gu Hua smiled lightly and said, "Of course you can. Musian is at the peak of the 4th level of God refining, and he is at the 7th level of God refining. The 3 major levels cannot be won by relying on the so-called foundation." "Then do you think you can beat Sister Lingxian?" Tang Sophie asked again. This time, Gu Hua was silent for a long time. "It's difficult," he answered truthfully. "They are all talented disciples of the ancient family. He has fought against many talented people in the past, but so far, only when he first came into contact with Ye Lingxian, he had experienced unexplainable psychological pressure. That beautiful lady of heaven is probably the most powerful contender in this immortal ascension conference. This is his intuition. And his intuition has not missed him so far. Mr. Mu can't beat Sister Lingxian, and you can't beat Sister Lingxian, so what's the use of beating Mr. Mu?" Tang Sophie said murderously. Gu Hua chuckled, looked sideways, and said with a smile, "At least it shows that I am better than him. You are so outstanding, why haven't I seen you treat Sister Lingxian to submission?" Tang Sophie glanced at the garden behind her. Gu Hua subconsciously looked around. Ye Lingxian, who had a cold face just now, was being held by Musian with a small hand. He seemed to have whispered something in Ye Lingxuan's ear, causing a charming look to appear on the girl's face. The blush is really pretty. This scene made even a broad-minded person like Gu Hua look almost distorted and difficult to accept. As if aware of the two people's gazes, Ye Lingxian recovered from her shyness and raised her head. Under her beautiful and charming face, there was a bit of coldness in her eyes. Obviously, she has no habit of showing affection in front of others. Tang Sophie smiled at her and whispered, "Go back first. This matter needs to be discussed again with the elders. There are many geniuses in the Lianji section. If the great elder's prediction is correct, if the former master of the World Sea is really still alive and in the East Continent, with the talent of the original witch, it stands to reason that he should have been in Liangzhou long ago. It's only right that he becomes famous within Yi Zone. Since neither Ye Lingxian nor Ye Xiu are the original witches, we can only conduct the investigation again." And just when Tang Sophie was about to look back and leave, she suddenly felt the box in her hand vibrate slightly, as if something inside was about to jump out of the box. Tang Sophie was stunned for a moment. Is the box responding? But she had just conducted the test, and the two beauties of heaven in the restricted area should have nothing to do with the original witch. Tang Sophie seemed to have remembered something, and slowly turned her head, staring at Musian in astonishment with a bit of horror. Gu Hua noticed something strange about the saint next to him, raised his eyebrows slightly, and asked doubtfully, "What's wrong? Could it be that you have fallen in love with this Mr. Mu?" There was a hint of ridicule in his tone. Tang Sophie did not have any intention of joking, and said with a somewhat hesitant tone, "The box has reacted to Musian." Gu Hua raised his head suddenly, and a ridiculous idea flashed through his mind. He is the original witch. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 267. The original witch, could it be a man? Almost as soon as they saw the box in their hands react, the two saints and saints from the World Sea had extremely absurd thoughts in their minds. How is this possible? There is a huge island in the center of the World Sea, and on that island, there is a sculpture of the original witch. And the statue of the original witch is, without a doubt, a woman. As a result, now, the thing in the box actually reacted to a man? This also means that the other party is very likely to be the original witch, or someone who had a close relationship with the original witch in the past. But you have to know that the era of the original witch has been tens of thousands of years away from now. How can a monk who has just joined the sect be related to the original witch? Gu Hua frowned, looking at the young man in black and gold robes not far ahead, hesitantly said, "It's a bit strange. How could the box left by the original witch react to a male cultivator?" Tang Sophie was wearing a blue dress and had an elegant figure. At this time, her eyebrows were also frowned, and she looked at Musian with the same doubt. After a brief hesitation, she immediately made up her mind and walked towards Musian with the box in her arms. On the other side, Ye Lingxian was chatting with Musian in a low voice. Noticing the approach of the two, she looked up and smiled, "Do you two have anything else to say? I have some questions about the skills and I'm asking Brother Mu, so." Ye Lingxian used a more euphemistic way to express her meaning. Musian glanced at the girl beside him with a smile in his eyes, seeing through but not saying it. Ye Lingxian's skills were inherited from the reincarnated queen, so it would be a miracle if he could teach Ye Lingxian the skills. However, he was quite relieved that the girl was willing to say so. Thinking about Ye Lingxian's cold attitude when she first met him, she had an arrogant look of "You'd better stay away from my sister," elegant and proud like a white swan. And now, although she still maintains a calm and elegant attitude, it is obvious that she can feel the tenderness of the girl after falling in love. Gu Hua looked at the scene and couldn't help but feel a little more helpless. But soon he gathered his thoughts, clasped his fists, and smiled, "I'm sorry to bother you two, but if possible, I would like to ask Mr. Mu to do a test as well." Looking at Ye Lingxian with doubts in her eyes, Tang Sophie immediately said, "This obsidian box has a reaction to Mr. Mu." Ye Lingxian was stunned for a moment, and subconsciously looked at the ancient box in Tang Sophie's hand. This box has been baptized by the years and exudes an ancient atmosphere. Before, whether it was Ye Lingxian or Yesiyu who tested it, the box had never had any reaction. However, now, it was actually shaking slightly, as if it was about to break away from Tang Sufi's hands. After understanding what the two meant, Ye Lingxian looked at them with a somewhat unbelievable look and said, "Do you suspect that he is the original witch?" Tang Sufi showed a helpless smile, raised the box in her hand and placed it in front of Musian, staring into his eyes, and said, "If it is possible, I dare not believe it, but the facts prove that this box did react after Master Mu entered the villa. Master Mu, can you try it a little?" Musian listened to the conversation between the three and gradually sorted out the current situation. Which, this word is actually a compliment in Juzhu. In the past, there was no leader in the sea of the world, and the various forces were constantly fighting with each other. There were even more ominous creatures in the deep sea ready to move, until a strong man united with the Tao, and then broke this situation. She suppressed the unknown in the deep sea and united all the forces together. The patriarchs of those ancient forces were so powerful that they could cause great shocks if they stomped their feet in Juzhu, but they were willing to succumb to the charm of the original witch. People were curious about her origin, identity, and even appearance, but because she wore a hooded robe all year round, no one had ever seen her face. Even those who had seen her would quickly forget her after that. One day after that, the original witch disappeared mysteriously. Later, people learned that the former owner of the World Sea was only a land immortal in the Return to Void realm 2 or 3 years ago. As a result, it took less than 3 years to break the shackles of heaven and earth and enter the Hedeo realm. "Do you suspect that I am the original witch?" Musian couldn't help asking. "This is too outrageous. The former owner of the World Sea was the original witch, not the original demon man. What's the point of them finding a male cultivator to test this thing? Moreover, the World Sea is easy to defend but difficult to attack, and the cultivation of the cultivators passing through there will be restricted, but why would they come out now to look for the trace of the original witch? Could it be that something went wrong inside the World Sea?" Tang Sufi shook her head and said, "Of course, I don't think that Mr. Mu is the original witch, but since the box left by the original witch resonates with you, it means that even if you are not the original witch, you may have some connection with that senior. If Brother Mu doesn't want to test, I'll ask them to leave." Ye Lingxian suddenly sent a voice message. Musian turned his head to look at the girl next to him, and then sent a voice message, "It's very happy that Sister Lingxian is willing to think about me, but I'm also a little curious about why this thing reacts to me. Anyway, it won't waste much time, so it doesn't hurt to try it a little." Musian stretched out his hand and gently touched the box in Tang Sufi's hand. "Inject a wisp of spiritual energy into it, and it will determine whether you are related to the original witch," Guhua reminded. Musian nodded slightly, and then injected a wisp of spiritual energy in his body into the dark box. The box was deep black, and there seemed to be a faint light. When Musian injected that wisp of spiritual energy into it, the wisp of spiritual energy was like a thin line, outlining complex patterns on the box. However, that was all. After that, the three of them waited for an incense stick of time, but the box still did not move. When Tang Sufi relaxed in secret, she couldn't help but feel a little regretful. Relaxed because the predecessor she admired was not a male witch, and regretful that they had to continue to look for the whereabouts of the original witch. However, the area of Dongzhou is so vast, when will it be found? This box resonates with Mr. Mu, but it doesn't react to the spiritual energy he injected into it. Guhua raised his eyebrows slightly, with a bit of confusion in his eyes, and began to think secretly. Moreover, the box that just resonated with Musian has now become quiet with the injection of Musian's spiritual energy, which is also a bit worrying. But no matter what, Musian's test also ended in failure, and the two of them couldn't continue to disturb him. Tang Sufi raised her head and smiled lightly, "I'm sorry, I have delayed Mr. Mu's time for a lot. If you are free another day, please invite Mr. Mu to drink tea and discuss Taoism." Musian smiled and nodded, but looked at the box in Tang Sufei's hand a few more times strangely. According to what they just said, this box resonated with him, but after injecting spiritual energy at this moment, the box did not react. This is a bit worrying. Can you lend me the box in Miss Tang's hand to take a look? Musian asked. Of course, Tang Sufei smiled. Musian took the box, and the texture he touched felt like steel, and the surface was extremely smooth, like a rare jade. Musian soon saw the deep black light flickering faintly on the surface of the box. The spiritual energy he had just injected into it had not yet dissipated, and was now swimming on the surface of the box, like a small fish swimming in the water. Musian put his hand on the surface of the box and tried to open the lid. Seeing this, Tang Sufei immediately said, "It cannot be opened by brute force. The elders of the tribe have tried several methods, but still cannot open this box. The elder once said that it can only be opened with the approval of the original witch. But the witch senior has always been alone in the past. I'm afraid that the only person who can open it is her." When Gu Hua said this, there was inevitably a little more regret in his eyes. In the past, it was rumored that the box left by the original witch contained her inheritance. Those who can open it can inherit her will and become the master of the World Sea. For this reason, the World Sea has held several conferences to let a group of talented people try. The result is obvious: no one can open this box. Musian did not give up, and tried to inject a wisp of spiritual energy into this small box again, and then, as if pulling out silk from a cocoon, carefully controlled this wisp of spiritual energy, trying to use this spiritual energy to open the tightly closed lid. However, in less than a few seconds, the spiritual energy he had just injected into it disappeared quietly from the box, as if it had never appeared. "Someone has tried it before, and it can't be opened with spiritual energy," Tang Sufei explained. "Mr. Mu, if the box can be opened in such a simple way, we wouldn't bring this box to Dongzhou this time to find someone who can open it." Gu Hua shook his head and smiled. Although Musian has a pretty good appearance, he seems to be a bit stubborn. It's easy to think that they must have tried every possible way to open the box left by the original witch, so they had to leave the World Sea and come to Dongzhou to find its real owner. According to the current speculation, if the box can be opened, it must be someone who has a connection with the original witch. Although I don't know why the box just reacted to Musian, from the current situation, Musian is probably not the person they are looking for. Seeing that Musian tried to open the box by brute force after failing to inject spiritual energy, Gu Hua frowned slightly and was about to take the box from Musian. Click. When Musian's palm touched the surface of the box, he almost didn't exert any force, and heard an ancient and heavy voice from the box. A wisp of gloomy black mist silently overflowed from the box. Gu Hua's pupils suddenly contracted, staring at the box in Musian's hand, which had been opened a little. He actually opened the box so easily. You know, the clan leaders and elders have tried hundreds of methods in the past, including this kind of brute force, but none of them had any effect on the box. But now Musian used brute force to open the box directly? Tang Sufei opened her red lips slightly, and her eyes were also stunned. After a brief moment of astonishment, her beautiful eyes looked at Musian with an unprecedented light, and she was extremely excited. He really had something to do with the original witch. Then, her eyes were quickly attracted by the box in Musian's hand. This box has existed in the World Sea for a long, long time, and many people in the tribe are full of curiosity about what is in the box. And now, they can see what is hidden in it. Ya Lingxian was also surprised. She tilted her head slightly and looked at Musian's handsome profile. Her eyes soon fell on the box in his hand. For some reason, she had an inexplicable premonition in her heart. She was born with a spirit body, but when the box was opened, she smelled some dangerous breath from it. Not only Ya Lingxian, but even Musian realized this at this moment. Almost when he opened a small crack in the box, he felt a dense cold chill in his heart, as if he was in an extreme winter environment. This box is like Pandora's box, full of temptation. It is obvious that just opening a small crack makes people aware of the danger, but it still makes people want to open it to find out. Musian hesitated for a moment, then suppressed his impulse and covered it again. Gu Hua subconsciously looked up at Musian and said, "Brother Mu, what's wrong?" He was about to open it, but he covered it at the critical moment. This made Gu Hua feel tormented for a while, and he wanted to control Musian's hand to open the box. Although Tang Sufei did not speak, she also stared at Musian, with some confusion and anxiety in her beautiful eyes. "Are you sure there is no danger here?" Musian looked up at the two and asked. "This box has a very dangerous aura. Although he does not know what is inside, his intuition tells him that it is better not to open it." The two looked at each other, and Tang Sufei said anxiously, "Mr. Mu, this thing is a box left by the original witch, so that people in the future can open it. Since you are destined to it, why don't you see what she left for future generations?" Ye Lingxian stared at the box in Musian's hand, and suddenly said, "The things in it seem to be dangerous." Tang Sufei hesitated for a moment and said, "It would be good if the elder was here. With her protection, there would be no such concerns." Gu Hua heard this and looked at Musian, saying, "Brother Mu, why don't you come with us to find our elder and let him protect you?" Musian pondered for a moment, and then his eyes fell on Ye Lingxian. "Sister Lingxian." Ye Lingxian nodded gently as if she knew what Musian wanted to say, and looked at the woman not far away. At the same time, a calm and pleasant voice sounded softly, responding to Ye Lingxian's eyes, "Open it, I will protect you." Several people looked subconsciously and saw the mature queen standing by the pond. A head of hair like a waterfall, loose white clothes, and gorgeous and cold eyes seemed to have no emotional fluctuations. Gu Hua was slightly shocked and looked at the woman in awe. The aura emanating from this woman was much stronger than the elders who accompanied them this time. The reincarnated queen, or in other words, the doll made by Ye Lingxian in the past. Since even this existence has spoken, Musian naturally felt relieved, but just in case, he still shouted in his heart, "Yao Meng." Yao Meng did not reply, and seemed to be sleeping. "Fairy," Musian called out again tentatively in his heart. Still no response. It seems that she is really sleeping normally. Musian quickly gathered his thoughts and his eyes fell on the box in his hand. With a slight force on his thumb, he slowly opened the lid. The eyes of several people were all fixed on the sealed box. Gu Hua's breathing was uncontrollably accelerated, and his eyes were full of expectations. 10,000 years. No one has cracked the box left by the original witch in these 10,000 years, and now, this mystery is finally solved. Is it the ancestral artifact left by the original witch, or her inheritance, or even the practice? The box saw the light again, and the things hidden in it also emerged in everyone's vision. Even Ye Lingxian, who was indifferent by nature, was attracted at this moment. Even the cold goddess could not resist the temptation of gossip and eating melons. Musian's eyes fell and solidified on the items in the box. Then, he was slightly stunned. What was in the box was not an ancestral artifact, nor a technique, nor an inheritance. It was a peach blossom. And a paper crane. "Paper crane," Gu Hua murmured, with a bit of bewilderment and confusion in his eyes. What the original witch left behind for future generations was just a paper crane. Musian had never spoken again since the beginning, but just stared at the peach blossom in the box with doubt, and picked up the peach blossom with trembling fingers. Ye Lingxian narrowed her eyes slightly, with a hint of doubt in her eyes. "How come this peach blossom is exactly the same as the peach blossom in the pilgrimage temple?" "The peach blossom in the pilgrimage temple is pink with some white, and it also contains a special aura. And this peach blossom also has a similar aura." Ye Lingxian looked up at Musian, as if she wanted to say something, and whispered, "Brother Mu." However, Musian's eyes were fixed on the paper crane in the box, with a dull look in his eyes. The folding technique of this paper crane was exactly the same as his. Coincidence? Musian, feeling a little uneasy, slowly opened the paper crane and turned over the back of the letter. There was only one sentence on it. Long time no see. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 268. In a black box left by the original witch 10,000 years ago, there is a letter with only 4 short words written on it. In addition, there is also a peach blossom that has never withered in the black box. Obviously, the black box of the original witch was not left for the descendants of the world sea, but a gift to someone, or in other words, it is the original witch's thoughts. The sentence in the letter is obviously greeting someone she misses. If this black box was not opened by Musian, he would probably think from the perspective of an observer who the original witch was greeting. However, the black box that no one had opened in the past, he easily opened it without even using his spiritual energy. Musian's mind was in a mess, staring at the letter and the 4 words that appeared on it in doubt. He closed his eyes slightly with a bit of uneasiness. Holding the letter in his hand, he recalled the way he folded the paper crane and folded it into the shape of a paper crane again. Then, he slowly opened his eyes and looked at the paper crane in his hand expressionlessly. The way he folded the paper crane was exactly the same as the one he folded for other girls in the past. Is it a coincidence? For a moment, Musian fell into a long period of contemplation. Ye Lingxian took out the peach blossom from the black box and placed it in front of her eyes. With a doubtful look, she carefully observed it for a moment and whispered to herself, could it be that the original witch had also been to the pilgrimage hall in the past? The pilgrimage hall in the Lianji sect was full of specially cultivated peach blossoms. The peach blossom in the black box was exactly the same as the peach blossom in the pilgrimage hall in terms of shape, smell, and even aura. But if so, it doesn't make sense why Musian could open this black box. Unless, he is someone the original witch knows. When Ye Lingxian thought of this, her eyes inadvertently looked at the young man beside her, and her slender hand hidden in her sleeve subconsciously grasped the lock of the desolate time. Musian naturally didn't know what Ye Lingxian was thinking at the moment. Looking at the letter in front of him, he turned the back again, but he didn't see any handwriting on the back. Look at the tone, it seems like she is greeting an acquaintance. Could it be that she knows me? Musian looked at the 4 big words on the letter, and his thoughts flashed through his mind like a fleeting light. As he looked, he suddenly felt that the handwriting in front of him gradually appeared double. At this moment, he seemed to be standing in the ever-changing light, and seemed to be in the long river of time. Countless images flew through his mind. And in the images that flew by, there were many scenes that he had never seen before. He didn't even have time to see what those scenes were before he cut to the next video. The mysterious black fog silently permeated the villa, gradually surrounding Musian, and his vision gradually turned into a deep black. Then, from the black fog, a ray of light that seemed to break through the night suddenly lit up silently in the air. Musian subconsciously raised his head, and a pair of cold hands reached out from the darkness silently and held his face. It was a woman, but he couldn't see her face clearly. I have seen her, for some reason, Musian had this thought in his mind. Who are you? Musian opened his mouth slightly and found that he could speak. The woman lowered her head slightly, with a faint smile, and whispered to him in a voice that seemed to be able to bewitch people, I have been waiting for you. But I haven't seen you, beautiful woman. Musian wanted to say this, but at that moment, he suddenly felt a dizziness in his brain, everything in front of him suddenly accelerated backwards, and his brain was blank in an instant. He resisted the dizziness, raised his head and stared at the woman whose face he couldn't see clearly, and said with difficulty, Who are you? The moment the voice fell, the thoughts in his mind were completely cut off. Brother Mew. Yalingsuan's soft and pleasant voice suddenly came to his ears, so he opened his eyes suddenly. Yalingxian held his shoulders with a concerned look and asked with concern, "What's wrong with you? Are you feeling unwell?" Muzian looked at the purple-dressed girl beside him with a doubtful look, and then turned his head to look at the surrounding environment. Tang Sufei pursed her red lips and stared at him, while Gu Hua's face was also solemn. "Brother Mew, did you find anything from the paper crane just now?" "I was unconscious just now," Muzian asked. Yalingxian nodded gently, "Your consciousness was unconscious for about an incense stick of time. I just confirmed with her that there is no danger or sequelae." The she Yalingxian was talking about was naturally the reincarnated queen. After Yalingxian finished speaking, she continued to ask, "How do you feel now?" The pair of eyes that used to be indifferent were full of concern. Muzian came back to his senses, looked down at the paper crane in his palm, and shook his head in a daze. "It's okay. It's okay," he murmured in a low voice. Just now, when he was looking at the contents of the paper crane, he felt that the surrounding environment had changed for a moment, as if it was covered by a layer of mist. At first, he thought that everyone was in the mist. But now it seems that it is not the surrounding environment that has changed, but that he fainted after looking at the letter paper and had a dream. There was another woman in the dream at that time, although I can't remember her appearance. If this letter was left by the original witch, then the woman I saw in the dream should be the original witch without a doubt. "Mr. Mew, lend me the letter," Tang Sufei suddenly said. Muzian barely suppressed the messy thoughts in his heart, nodded slightly, and handed the letter to the saint from the world sea. "Brother Gu, do you know the real name of the original witch?" Muzian suddenly asked. Gu Huazhan and Tang Sufei were looking at the words written in the letter. Hearing this, he immediately shook his head, and his tone was a little more regretful, "I don't know. After all, the monks in the world sea at that time called her the original witch. It seems that they didn't know her real name, and very few people had seen her." After he finished speaking, he took up the black box with a bit of unwillingness and observed it carefully for a long time. In a black box stored in the depths of the world sea, there was no inheritance or even skills left, only the original witch's thoughts for someone. Thinking of this, and thinking of the fact that they had come to Lianji sect from afar, Gu Hua felt even more depressed. At this time, Yalingxian suddenly said, "When did this black box stay in the world sea?" "About 10,000 years ago," Tang Sufei said. Then, as if she had guessed what Yalingxian wanted to say, she immediately shook her head and said, "Impossible, even if it was the original witch, it would be impossible to deduce the secrets of heaven from 10,000 years ago, and even calculate that this black box would eventually fall into the hands of someone who could open it." When she said this, she looked at Muzian with a strange look in her eyes. Compared to this, there is another thing that is also of concern. From the past to now, no one has been able to open this black box, but Muzian opened it, and the black box did resonate with Muzian. So does that mean that Muzian is the person recognized by the original witch, and the black box is left for him? But in the black box that has been stored for tens of thousands of years, there is only one sentence and a peach blossom. This is too weird. Moreover, how could a young cultivator who has just entered the Lianji sect for less than half a year be involved with the original witch who has been missing for nearly 10,000 years? Muzian looked at the black box in Gu Hua's hand, and then looked down at the peach blossom in his hand, with a hint of darkness in his eyes. Tang Sufei was right. A strong man in the Hedao realm could not deduce the secrets of heaven and calculate what would happen 10,000 years later. In the past, King Di and even other chiefs have said similar things. Deducing the secrets of heaven will be backfired. The longer the timeline of deduction, the greater the backlash. No matter how gorgeous the original witch was, she couldn't be so exaggerated. What would happen from 10,000 years ago to 10,000 years later? Muzian looked up at the two of them and said, You too, can I borrow this black box for a few days? There are still many mysteries in the black box that have not been solved. If I can find new discoveries after returning, I will contact you too. Muzian continued. Guhua and Tang Sufia looked at each other, and it seemed that they were secretly communicating, so that no one spoke in the villa for a long time. Muzian did not urge them, but waited patiently for the two to finish their discussion. Yalingxian lowered her eyes slightly, and a hint of obscurity flashed in her eyes, as if she was worried about something. At this time, she suddenly felt a warm palm quietly wrapped around her. Yalingxian turned her head subconsciously, and Muzian gave her a reassuring smile, and softly said, "Don't worry, I will always be by your side." So quickly put away your desolate time lock. Muzian glanced at the desolate time lock on Yalingxian's sleeve, with a bit of fear in his eyes. Looking at the smile on Muzian's face at this moment, Yalingxian was stunned for a short time, and then quickly showed a faint smile. Yes, no matter whether the original witch knew Brother Mu or not, and whether the content of the letter was greeting him, at least now, he is by her side. Even if the original witch is not dead and really knows him, she can also keep Brother Mu by her side in the future. After all, the desolate time lock had already locked Muzian when it recognized its master that day. No matter where Muzian is, she can find him. In the future, she can even use the desolate time lock to bring Muzian back to her side directly. When thinking of this, Yalingxian's delicate and attractive face showed a faint smile, which made Guhua, who was discussing the black box with Tang Sufia, stunned. "Guhua, don't forget that we are talking about business now." Seeing this, Tang Sufia couldn't help but remind him secretly. Guhua woke up a little and shook his head helplessly. Even the World Sea Saint, who had received a good education since childhood, felt a little sour in his heart when he saw the sweet smile of the restricted area saint only to Muzian. He reluctantly restrained his thoughts and said in a voice transmission, "What do you think of the saint? The black box has no reaction to you and me. If the secret of this black box can be solved, it would have been done in the past." Tang Sufia said in a voice transmission, "And this black box resonates with Muzian, which means that the original witch recognizes Muzian. I think it's okay to let him try. For us, there is no harm." Guhua pondered for a moment and finally nodded gently. "It seems that you two have made up your mind." Muzian saw the scene and guessed it in his heart. Tang Sufia looked up at Muzian and said, "Mr. Mu, if you can solve the secret in this black box, I can guarantee that the World Sea will always be your friend in the future. If you need anything, just ask. Who are the peach blossoms and letter paper in the black box for, and whether there are any secrets in it? These are things that the two people, and even the whole World Sea, want to know. Since Muzian has a connection with this black box, maybe he can really solve this mystery." Muzian nodded seriously and agreed, "Please rest assured, I can swear that if there is a legacy left by the original witch in this black box, I will put it back in the black box intact." With Muzian's guarantee and even the witness of the avenue, the two people naturally have a lot of good feelings for Muzian's generosity. After chatting with him for a while, Guhua finally couldn't help but whispered, "Brother Mu, what is your relationship with Miss Yet? I seem to have heard that you already have a Taoist partner." "Lingxian is my beloved sister," Muzian whispered. Guhua's eyes moved slightly, "Then if someone pursues her?" Muzian was stunned. "I just said a few superficial words, and you really believed it?" "I said a few words casually. Do you really want to be my brother-in-law?" Guhua. He quickly came back to his senses and smiled freely, "See you at the Ascension Conference." After watching the two leave, Muzian put the peach blossom and paper crane back into the black box. Because of what happened today, Muzian was not in the mood to instruct Yesiu. After chatting with Yalingxian in the villa for a while, he planned to leave the villa with the black box. "Brother Mu, I don't know if the desolate time lock can still lock you on this trip to the martial world. You must be careful," Yalingxian suddenly reminded. There are formation restrictions in the martial world, and the elders of the Lianji sect are secretly monitoring her, so it is naturally not convenient for her to take action. After all, most people don't know that Ye Lingxian has the ancestral weapon. When the time comes for the Ascension Conference, the Lock of Desolate Time will be one of her biggest trump cards. Musian paused, turned his head and looked, and smiled gently. Don't worry, I know my limits. Tell sister see you later that I have something to do today and can't go to her, Musian continued. After watching Ye Lingxian nod obediently, Musian turned around and walked out of Dex Sinyuan. Until then, the smile on his face was restrained a little, and he silently took out the paper crane he had received not long ago. The identity of the original witch could not be recognized from the handwriting alone, but assuming that the sentence "long time no see" in the other party's paper crane was said to him, it means that the original witch knew him. The sentence "long time no see" is more like a person consciously greeting him. Even a strong man in the Hedeo realm could not know that the black box would eventually fall into his hands 10,000 years later. Then, what if it was a reborn person? If it was a reborn person, it would explain everything. The title of reborn person before did not appear for no reason, but there really was a reborn person around me, but she surfaced today. It is even possible that the original witch is still alive now. Just as Musian was thinking about 1,000 things in his mind, he suddenly felt that the paper crane in his hand seemed to react, as if it wanted to break free from his palm. Musian subconsciously let go of the paper crane, and saw the paper crane in his hand fly away from his palm and fly in a certain direction. This paper crane has its own consciousness, or has it been set by someone a long time ago, and now it is going to find its owner? Or, the original witch is in the Lianji sect. Musian's heart was startled, and he immediately summoned the flying sword and followed the paper crane closely, his heart full of uneasiness and curiosity about the unknown. Less than half a minute later, he saw the paper crane fly into a cave in the glazed palace. Musian took the opportunity to look at the plaque of the villa above the cave. Tianhe Garden. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 269. The paper crane, wrapped in the deep black mist, slowly flew into the depths of Tianhe Garden. Musian Yujian followed closely behind, his heart filled with surprise and suspicion, his eyes fixed on the paper crane that seemed to have self-awareness at this moment. The original witch, if the previous guesses are correct, then she is probably the reborn one. But now, the paper crane left behind by the original witch thousands of years ago has flown into Tianhe Garden by itself, seemingly intending to find someone who lives here. Could it be that the original witch is still alive and living in Tianhe Garden? Musian's mind was in a mess. After entering the villa, he raised his hand to put away the flying sword and followed Zhaihe closely. It is winter in Kyushu. The ground is covered with a thin layer of snow, and snowflakes fall in the sky with the howling cold wind. The paper crane sways gently like a boat on the sea, as if it will be blown away by the wind at any time. But its body was never even half wet. Black mist filled the surroundings of the paper crane, and it floated away along the quiet path. At the same time, in Tianhe Garden, the pool near the courtyard was frozen with a thin layer of ice. In front of the pavilion, Bairuoxi was wearing a pure white house skirt printed with plum blossoms and a plum-colored jacket. She was as cold as frost and snow, and her moist and tender eyes were as gentle as water. Sister Mengru, it's so cold today, why don't you sit down and have a cup of tea? She looked at Wei Mengru, who was silently beside her, holding a thin book open with one hand, and shouted softly. While speaking, he personally watched the tea for Wei Mengru and brought it to her side. Wei Mengru glanced at Bairuoxi, sat next to her, put down the book, held the teacup in both hands, and gently blew in the rising hazy mist. Anything gained? Bairuoxi's eyes fell on the books placed by Wei Mengru on the table inadvertently. The Way to Control Your Husband. This was lent to Wei Mengru by Miss Bai some time ago. Originally, Wei Mengru just accidentally bumped into Bairuoxi reading such a strange book, but she had no intention of exposing it. However, Bairuoxi directly lent the book to her. Although she didn't have much interest in this kind of books, she couldn't resist Bairuoxi's enthusiasm, so she finally accepted the book. The harvest that Bairuoxi asked about at this moment naturally refers to the content in this book. Wei Mengru hesitated for a moment, then nodded slightly, a few. Although there are some less serious contents in that book, in general, it is still a book about mastering the psychology of others. After reading that book, it was like opening the door to a new world for the maid who had devoted herself to cultivation in the past. It's good that Sister Mengru has gained something, Bairuoxi said with a slight smile. Then, with a somewhat worried tone, she sighed softly. Mulang seems to be somewhat interested in the Immortal Ascension Conference. If I run into him in the end, what do you think I should do? The winner of this Immortal Ascension Conference will also receive an additional prize, which is Musion. Although this prize is a bit ridiculous, it is a fair competition for the girls. Whoever wins will take the initiative in Musion in the future. After all, this is already the default competition for others. But Bairuoxi has not yet thought about how to deal with Musion if he meets Musion at the final Ascension Conference. He won't mind being defeated by others, let alone someone he likes, Wei Mengru said calmly. She paused, put her hand on her snow-white chin, and pondered for a moment, with a trace of pleasure flashing in her eyes. It would be better to say, if you are usually dissatisfied with him, you might as well give him a fair beating at the Immortal Ascension Conference. Bairuoxi said helplessly, sometimes I'm completely confused about the relationship between Sister Mengru and Mulang. Wei Mengru's attitude towards Musion has always been cold, but she has always been by his side. This complicated behavior is somewhat difficult to understand in the eyes of many people. Wei Mengru said calmly, don't he like to be treated like this the most? After all, Musion had said puzzling words like Sister Mengru, please scold me, or Sister Mengru, step on me. She turned her head to look at Bairuoxi, and stared into those gentle and bright eyes. It has always been like this when we were in Tianqian City. Like to be bullied? Bairuoxi tilted her head slightly, with a bit of confusion in her eyes. Then, as if she remembered something, she gently pressed her slender fingers on the fabric of her thighs. Looking at the small embroidered shoes under her skirt, she recalled in her mind that Musion was stepped on and bullied by her one night before, but showed a rather pleasant scene. Bairuoxi's pretty face was gradually stained with a faint blush, and she raised her head and was about to speak. At this time, she suddenly seemed to sense some dangerous aura, her weak posture instantly disappeared, and several dazzling golden lightsabers behind her quietly unfolded like a peacock spreading its tail, brilliant and dazzling. Bairuoxi stared into the air. A certain spiritual consciousness in the body seemed to have been called. The master of the Sword Palace, who was curled up in Bairuoxi's cauldron, closed his eyes tightly and frowned slightly. As if he had received some kind of induction, he slowly opened his eyes. Eyes opened. In a certain room, Linling was lying in front of the windowsill, holding a roasted crane leg in his hand, looking at the snowy scene outside the window with a pair of bright and moving red eyes. The charcoal fire in the house burned quietly, adding a lot of warmth to the room. Snowy weather, charcoal fire, warm room, plus a pot of hot tea and a freshly baked 8-treasure crane. In the entire Lianji sect, probably only Miss Linling knows how to enjoy it. Although it is based on the heartache of the head of Kanghai Peak. As if she had sensed something, Linling opened her small red lips slightly, took a bite of roasted crane meat, and her gorgeous eyes quietly looked at the snow curtain in the distance. Under the pure white snow scene, a paper crane wrapped in black mist flew into Tianhe Garden. It looked ordinary, but if a cultivator saw it for the first time, he would involuntarily feel awe. Boom! Suddenly there was a thunder in the sky, and there seemed to be rolling calamity clouds in the distant sky. After Lin Ling swallowed the crane meat, she whispered something. In Tianhe Garden, a formation silently enveloped it. The calamity cloud disappeared in an instant. Lin Ling poured a cup of hot tea, looked up and looked out the window, as if she saw something. She couldn't help but tilt her head and blinked her moist red eyes. Then, she raised her teacup and clinked it with the window. Wei Mengru stared at the paper crane approaching slowly in the distance with uncertainty. The paper crane was emitting an ominous black mist at the moment. It did not emit much spiritual energy, but it made people feel inexplicably palpitating. Paper crane. Bairuoxi stared at the paper crane in the air, her eyebrows slightly raised, with some doubts in her eyes. Soon, she realized that the mysterious paper crane seemed to be flying in their direction. Sister Mengru, be careful, this thing is weird, Bairuoxi reminded in a low voice, alert to the mysterious paper crane in the air. However, Wei Mengru did not retreat, but walked forward slowly, as if attracted by the mysterious paper crane, and slowly raised her fingertips, as if she wanted to pick up the snowflakes falling outside. The mysterious paper crane wrapped in black mist came gracefully, until finally, it stopped at Wei Mengru's fingertips. Behind him, Bairuoxi looked at Wei Mengru's slender back with doubt, as well as the paper crane that stayed on the fingertips of the yellow-skirted maid. Bairuoxi hesitated and said, Sister Mengru, what is this thing? Wei Mengru shook her head gently, I don't know. When she saw the paper crane just now, she had an inexplicable sense of nostalgia. She couldn't explain why she had such a sense of nostalgia now. Wei Mengru slowly unwrapped the paper crane that stayed on her fingertips. At the same time, the words on the paper crane also came into view. Bairuoxi looked over, and after seeing the content of the letter, he couldn't help but look at Wei Mengru again subconsciously, and whispered, an acquaintance of Sister Mengru. Wei Mengru stared at the letter and shook her head slowly, I don't remember any acquaintances I know in the section. When she said this, she couldn't help but have a hint of doubt and confusion in her eyes. This is not a paper crane flying from the section at this time, Bairuoxi suddenly made a charming and cold pleasant voice. Her dress had been dyed black at some point, and bright red plum blossoms were printed on the black palace skirt. Compared with the weak image of the eldest lady in the past, Bairuoxi at this time had a more charming and seductive feeling. Wei Mengru's eyes were slightly fixed, Master of the Sword Palace. Aren't you still asleep? I was originally asleep, but you made such a big noise all of a sudden, it doesn't look like you intend to let people sleep peacefully. Gong Lianyu glanced at the letter in Wei Mengru's hand. Wei Mengru's mind moved slightly, and said, Senior, do you know the owner of this letter? I have met her once. After all, she is the only one who wants to step on it after resonating with the way of heaven. But I don't know why this paper crane resonates with you, Gong Lianyu just said here, and suddenly seemed to have a feeling, and looked up not far ahead. Wei Mengru also looked up. In the snowy garden, a young man in a black and gold robe was walking towards the courtyard, holding a black box in his hand. When the two found Musian, he naturally noticed them. He raised his head and was stunned when he saw Gong Lianyu, and then glanced at the palace skirt held up by her full chest, and then he thought in his heart, younger than Naxi, this is the master of the sword palace. If it were in the past, Musian would probably take this opportunity to secretly appreciate Gong Lianyu's figure again. Although her breasts are not as big as Naxi, her face is also stunning, and her temperament is completely opposite to Bairuoxi. This contrast is a fatal temptation for men. But now, compared to this, Musian is more concerned about the whereabouts of the paper crane. If I remember correctly, the paper crane just flew into this courtyard, but why can't I see it now? Musian just had this thought in his heart, and his eyes suddenly froze on the letter paper in Wei Mengru's hand. After a brief gaze, he subconsciously raised his head and looked at Wei Mengru in disbelief, muttering to himself, is it really you? The reborn person is Wei Mengru. As if she noticed Musian's eyes, Wei Mengru frowned slightly, stared at Musian, and said, "What's wrong?" Musian came back to his senses and walked into the courtyard with the black box in his arms. His eyes fell on the letter paper in Wei Mengru's hand, and he looked up at the maid. "The paper crane flew into your hand." Wei Mengru nodded gently and hesitated. "Is this paper crane yours?" Musian shook his head and put the black box on the table. "The paper crane is stored in this box." "Does the palace master know the origin of this black box?" Musian quickly looked up at Gong Lianyu and asked. "The Sword Palace has been established for tens of thousands of years. Gong Lianyu and the original witch should be people of the same era. Maybe she knows something about the identity of the original witch." However, Gong Lianyu's answer soon made Musian feel a little more regretful. "I have never seen this black box. However, this thing should be the thing of the original witch, and it still has her spiritual energy left on it," she continued. Musian's eyes moved slightly, looking at the beauty who was pure in her charm, and said, "Does the palace master know where the spiritual energy is stored?" Gong Lianyu shook her head slowly. "Give up, this box has a special formation. Unless it is someone recognized by her, no one else can unlock this black box." When she said this, she was stunned for a moment, as if she thought of something, and her beautiful eyes narrowed slightly. "Speaking of which, this black box can only be opened by people recognized by the original witch, and the paper crane was not in the black box just now. In other words, someone had opened the black box before and freed the paper crane in the black box." Then the question came. Who was that person? Gong Lianyu stared at Musian silently, with a bit of depth in her smart and beautiful eyes. Musian naturally didn't know what Gong Lianyu was thinking at the moment. His eyes fell directly on Wei Mengru and said, "Sister Mengru, do you have any impression of this thing?" He pointed to the black box on the table. Wei Mengru only took a glance and shook her head gently. "I don't have any impression." Sister Mengru didn't seem to be lying. Musian stared at Wei Mengru's sharp and charming face and calm answer, and soon he had a few more puzzles in his mind. The paper crane would not fly to Wei Mengru for no reason, but Sister Mengru didn't seem to be lying. And she had been with him for so long in the past. If Sister Mengru was really a reborn person, how could he not have discovered it until now? Just as Musian was thinking about these messy things in his heart, Wei Mengru seemed to be attracted by something, and her eyes fell on the black box on the table. She gently stroked the black box with her slender fingers, and then, under Musian's stunned eyes, she slowly opened the black box on the table. The seemingly ordinary peach blossom seemed to be induced by something at this time, and was filled with inexplicable black mist. Musian's eyes slightly solidified on the black mist. He practiced the secret arts of the southern wilds, so he recognized it at the first time. This black fog was exactly the same as the black fog that blocked the secrets of the sky in the southern wilds. Boom! There was a thunder in the sky, as if the heavens were shaking, and then a thunder like a dragon fell into the Tianhe garden at a speed that the monks could not react to. However, the thunder and lightning as thick as a dragon was swallowed up silently by the formation when it fell into the Tianhe garden, and even the sound of the outside world could not be heard in the Tianhe garden. Wei Mengru's eyes were slightly dazed, and she reached out and picked up the peach blossom. At this time, a ray of green light silently lit up in Musian's body. It quietly flew out of Musian's natural furnace, and then turned into a fairy wearing a blue-white long skirt, untainted by the mortal world. The fairy was also awakened. Musian subconsciously looked at Yao Meng's extraordinary figure, and he became more and more certain in his heart that there must be some relationship between the original witch and Wei Mengru. Although he was able to open the black box, he did not resonate with the items in the black box, but Wei Mengru easily resonated with these black boxes. "I just don't know if this is a good thing." At this time, a gentle voice suddenly sounded in Tianhe garden. "Kingdi, how did you get in his body?" Gong Lianyu stared at the fairy Yao Meng who was surrounded by the mist, and her beautiful eyes like stars revealed some doubts and the danger hidden in her eyes. Not good. Musian's heart jumped slightly, and he subconsciously looked at Yao Meng. As expected, Yao Meng slightly turned his eyes, and when he noticed the hostility and coldness in Gong Lianyu's eyes, the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up a faint arc. Her eyes flickered, her red lips parted slightly, and her heavenly voice contained a fairy charm, like a layer of gentle ripples on a calm lake. Do I need a reason to be with my Taoist partner? So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 270. The branches in the courtyard were covered with frost and snow, and the tea was filled with steam, but it was difficult to lower the temperature in the courtyard. After a monk reaches the realm of refining gods, as long as he is willing, he will not feel much coldness even in winter, because the qi in the body will dispel the coldness. However, the moment he heard Yao Meng's words, Musian's back broke out in cold sweat involuntarily, and he experienced what it means to feel a chill in his heart in this cold season. Gong Lianyu slightly narrowed her beautiful eyes, looked at the fairy from the Yaokai Holy Land next to Musian, and said quietly, "If I remember correctly, before you became acquainted with the Tao, there were not a few talented people who pursued you, but you didn't accept the pursuit of any monk. Now that you have entered the Hedeo realm, you fell in love with a young monk. Or is it that the first-generation saint of Yaokai in the eyes of the world prefers people younger than herself to the monks of her own generation?" Musian originally thought that Yao Meng was a fairy with a gentle personality who would not argue with others. Unexpectedly, she was also black when cut open. She looked at Musian with a half-smile, as if to say, "You are quite cool. Popular." Then, she inadvertently withdrew her gaze and said with a faint smile, "Emotions have nothing to do with realm. Unlike you, I didn't choose him as a Taoist companion because of his natural calculus. It's just that we just like each other." A simple sentence, but it is just a metaphor for Gong Lian's impure eyes. The underlying meaning is, you don't like him, you are just greedy for his body, you are despicable. Gong Lianyu raised her beautiful eyebrows slightly, and the golden lightsaber behind her vibrated faintly, causing the frost and snow outside the house to break into countless pieces, blowing diagonally into the pavilion like flying flowers and broken jade. Gong Lingyu glanced at Yao Meng with her peach blossom eyes, and said calmly, "If the scabbard's memory is correct, you only had a ray of spiritual consciousness left in the past. If he hadn't rescued you, I'm afraid you would have disappeared from this world by now. Later, I was able to condense my physical body with the help of the Tian Tian cauldron." When she spoke to the end, those magnificent eyes that were as bright as the stars stared into Yao Meng's eyes. "Is this what you call a congenial relationship?" The atmosphere in the pavilion seemed to have solidified into ice. Musian was frozen in place, his heart beating faster. "No, they are really going to fight. If they fight, I will die from an unknown AoE." Musian felt as if a red word danger appeared on the top of his head, and he didn't know when it seeped out on his forehead, breaking into a cold sweat. At this moment, he began to miss the little fish in the fish pond. The little fish were at odds with each other, but he could just defeat them one by one afterwards. But both of them are empresses with rich experience, so it is difficult to coax them well. If they are not careful, they might be locked up in a dark room. At this time, Yao Meng looked at Musian inadvertently, and a sweet voice came from the courtyard, "Whether he and I are in love, there is no need for an outsider to judge." She turned her head slightly to look at Musian, her red lips parted slightly, her blue jewel-like pupils had an indescribable charm, and the crimson in the corners of her eyes added a bit of charm. She smiled sweetly, "What do you think, Mu Lang?" The fairy sound was accompanied by a special Taoist rhyme, which made people feel good about it, but Musian's scalp felt numb. The pressure instantly came to Musian. A pure and charming smile appeared on Gong Lianyu's delicate face, and she said lightly, the dignified Qing emperor used the Taoist charm of the Yaokai Holy Land to seduce a young monk in the god-refining realm. If word spreads, I am afraid it will become a joke in Kyushu. Yao Meng smiled. The Tao of the Yaokai Holy Land can make people calm down, and it is not meant to seduce. But it is quite interesting whether you have secretly used the charm of the nine-tailed fox during your relationship with Mu Lang. The charm of the nine-tailed fox? Musian glanced at Gong Lianyu subconsciously. Speaking of which, Ruoxi has the characteristics of the three-tailed fox, which was inherited from Bai Yuanfeng. However, Gong Lianyu does not have any characteristics of a demon cultivator. After a brief thought, Musian was quickly relieved. Bai Ruoxi is indeed Bai Yuanfeng's daughter, but she is also a special being born as Gong Lianyu's scabbard. If one cultivates to the extreme in the future, the first twin souls in one body in Kyushu may appear, and there may also be a special existence where both demon and human spiritual consciousness have reached the realm of unity. And when Musian's mind was in a mess and he was thinking about these messy things, Gong Lianyu's eyes had already fallen on Musian. Malang, do you still remember what you promised me before? She was wearing a crow-black palace dress, which made her skin look white and crystal clear, as if translucent and beautiful. The lightsaber behind him unfolded quietly, his eyes were gentle, and Musian seemed to see Bai Ruoxi's figure in a trance. Then, his heart skipped a beat and he realized what Gong Lianyu meant. The situation was complicated when he was in Sword Palace before. He promised Gong Lianyu to cut off the relationship with other people. It was only at that time that he considered that Gong Lianyu would not wake up so quickly after falling asleep, so he decided to wait until the fish in the fish pond developed. But now, this woman was awakened by the black box left by the original witch. But Yao Meng was also awakened. However, as a qualified fish pond owner, no matter how urgent the situation is, you should maintain the most basic expression management. Musian is well aware of this truth. He coughed lightly and began to talk to Gong Lianyu. I will handle this matter properly, Palace Master, please rest assured. However, Gong Lianyu was not fooled. She stared at Musian with a pair of autumn water-like eyes, with a smile on her lips. I can ignore what happened between you and King Di in the past, but why not take this opportunity to make it clear to her? The relationship between you and me cannot be interfered with by an outsider, right? Musian. He suddenly felt a little overwhelmed. At this time, a slightly cool and soft hand quietly held Musian's right hand, and also pulled Musian back to reality from his thoughts just now. He subconsciously turned his head to look, and Yao Meng, who was wearing a light green skirt and had a graceful figure, held one of his hands, slightly tilted her head and stared at him with a smile. Although she never spoke, it was not difficult to see what she wanted to express from her eyes at this moment. That look clearly said, choose one. After a brief silence, Musian chose to give up thinking. Although he had expected that he would encounter such a thing sooner or later in the future, he never expected that this day would come so soon. Because a black box left by the original witch 10,000 years ago awakened the two big sharks in the fish pond, and now, these two big sharks just collided. If it was a small fish like Ya Lingxian or Bai Ruoxi, Musian might have just made up his mind, hugged a beauty in each hand, and chose I want them all. But now, if he tried to do this, he might die on the spot. Musian gritted his teeth, raised his hands and bowed to Gong Lianyu, saying, Palace Master, the relationship between me and Fairy Yao Meng is more complicated, and it can't be explained in a few words. I will handle it properly after this. He deliberately added a respectful title after Yao Meng, intending to give Gong Lianyu a hint, she is just my respected senior. Who knows, he seems to have underestimated Gong Lianyu's IQ. She smiled and said softly, do you mean that after this, you will sever your relationship with the Green Emperor and concentrate on practicing Taoism with me? If so, it's good. Gong Lianyu smiled gently and looked at Yao Meng. However, a deep chill flashed across Yao Meng's clear eyes, and then she turned her head and looked at Musian with a smile. Musian. There are very few Hedeo realm in this world, and coupled with the changes in the rules of heaven and earth, the strong people in Hedeo realm rarely fight in the true sense, so Jozu has always been the world of Fangsu realm. But the Hedeo realm does not take action easily, which does not mean that it can be ignored. After all, if such an existence is annoyed, even if there are shackles of the rules of heaven and earth, they will also take action to suppress the foreign enemy. Because of this, if there is a strong person in Hedeo realm, the other party's force will jump to the forefront. As a Hedeo realm existence, everyone will see each other when they look down. Although Gong Lianyu has never spoken to King Di in the past, they are aware of each other's existence. After all, both the Sword Palace and the Yaokai Holy Land were top forces in the past. However, they have always kept their distance from each other. But now, because of Musian's matter, such friction has arisen. In a sense, Musian, the female protagonist of destiny, can also be called a beauty who brings disaster. Gong Lianyu's eyes fell on Musian, and the golden lightsaber behind her turned into 9 sharp blades of light, forming a fan shape, unfolding behind her, emitting a terrifying aura. Yao Meng smiled and said nothing, looking very confident. Behind her, the pure world green lotus quietly lit up a ray of green light, and the green lotus exuded a peaceful aura. It was this seemingly peaceful green lotus that gave many powerful people in the Hedeo realm a headache in the past. The pure world green lotus can directly seal the spiritual energy of others, and this method is really daunting. But the blade behind Gong Lianyu can be divided into 108 sharp blades of light. If they fight, it is still unknown who will win and who will lose. Musian understood that both the Sword Palace Master and the Green Emperor were very strong people. The Green Emperor was like a fairy from the mortal world. He seemed kind and gentle, but in fact, he was difficult to approach. He was also very domineering and suspected of liking green people. The Sword Palace Master was a person with a strong possessiveness. Coupled with Yao Meng's previous provocation, this would evolve into what it is now. At this moment, he was caught between the two of them, neither up nor down. No matter how he answered, it would be wrong. If there was only one person, Musian would just say some sweet words and then operate, but now, it is obviously not suitable to do so. It is better to say that he can't even transmit sound now. After all, no one knows whether the two great powers have any means to block the sound transmission. Feeling the eyes of the two people looking at him at the same time, Musian secretly took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. Then, he opened his mouth slightly and was about to speak. At this time, Yao Meng seemed to have noticed something, subconsciously turned his head to look at Wei Mengru beside him, and frowned slightly. Musian followed Yao Meng's gaze and saw Wei Mengru, who was wearing a yellow dress and had a slender figure, holding the peach blossom in the black box in her hand. Her pupils seemed to be out of focus, as if she was in a daze. The black mist that permeated the peach blossom silently enveloped her. In the black mist, it seemed that a heavy sound of chains colliding could be heard vaguely. What sound? Musian asked subconsciously. Gong Lianyu's attention also fell on Wei Mengru, and her eyes flickered slightly. The peach blossom in Wei Mengru's hand seemed a little strange. There was something special in that peach blossom, and now that thing was attached to Wei Mengru. Sister Mengru, Musian stared at Wei Mengru's slender back and suddenly shouted, feeling something was wrong. The black mist on Wei Mengru's body seemed to be much thicker than before. However, Wei Mengru didn't seem to hear Musian's voice, but just looked down at the peach blossom in her hand. Her eyes seemed a little dazed. Just as Musian was about to speak, he suddenly heard a voice in his ear. "Miss you." No. That was not a voice from his ear, but a voice that appeared directly in his brain. "I miss you so much, I miss you so much, I miss you so much." That voice appeared directly in Musian's mind, and the soft and graceful voice sounded in Musian's mind, repeating over and over again. At this time, Yao Meng opened her red lips slightly, and a pleasant and melodious fairy voice sounded softly in the court. Since you are still alive, why don't you show your true self? When the voice fell, there seemed to be green ripples on the ground centered on Yao Meng. The voice in Musian's mind was also directly cut off. Wei Mengru looked a little dazed, and slowly raised her head. Her body was filled with deep black mist, and in the black mist, there seemed to be a faint sound of chains colliding with each other. Sister Mengru, Musian called out tentatively, but he still felt an indescribable weirdness in his heart. This woman was obviously not Wei Mengru, but a certain existence in the black box. However, her spiritual consciousness seemed to be very weak. Yao Meng's eyes narrowed slightly, and she said softly, "It is indeed the original witch, but the spiritual consciousness attached to others has long been eroded by time. This should be just her obsession. The peach blossom in the black box carries an obsession left by the original witch, and that obsession is now attached to Wei Mengru, as if she wants to fulfill her wish before her death." Musian's heart moved slightly, and his eyes fell on the yellow-skirted maid in front of him. An obsession that has been eroded by time reappeared in the world after 10,000 years, and its purpose is just to convey his thoughts to an important person around him, and after that, if this obsession disappears, I am afraid there will be no more original witches in this world. When thinking of this, Musian's heart was inevitably a little melancholy, and there was even more sympathy in his eyes when he looked at Wei Mengru. Although it is unclear why Wei Mengru is involved with the original witch, from the current situation, the original witch has no hostility towards them. When the obsession ends, the residual soul attached to Wei Mengru will probably disappear completely. At this time, Yao Menxia frowned slightly because she saw the original witch walking towards Musian. For some reason, she felt that this scene was a little familiar. Gong Lianyu narrowed her beautiful eyes slightly and stared at Wei Mengru. The sharp blade of light behind her vibrated faintly, as if she was about to sacrifice the sword at any time. She could see that the obsession left by the original witch in the black box was aimed at Musian. However, what exactly did the original witch want to do? At this moment, the two empresses stared at Wei Mengru, with some doubts in their eyes. And under the gaze of the two, Wei Mengru finally came to Musian. She raised her flawless and beautiful face and stared into Musian's eyes, which seemed to be filled with nostalgia. "Finally I see you." Her soft voice was filled with nostalgia. "Senior, do you know me?" Before Musian finished speaking, Wei Mengru had already put one hand on the back of his head. Then, under Musian's slowly widening eyes, she tilted her head slightly, and under the stunned gazes of Yao Meng and Gong Lianyu, she pressed her slightly cool and soft lips on Musian's lips. The only sound in the courtyard was the sound of snowflakes whistling in the north wind. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 271. The original witch, although she was the former master of the World Sea, actually she had never been in charge of the World Sea. It was just that after suppressing the turmoil, many forces in the World Sea willingly acquiesced to her as the master of the World Sea. As for the reason, firstly, the 9 provinces were in chaos at that time, and the World Sea did not burn there due to its terrain characteristics, but it was still a bit worrying. But if a strong man in the Hedeo realm sat in the World Sea, there would be no more worries. The strong men in the Hedeo realm in 9 provinces did not know each other, but at least they had heard of each other's names. However, even Yao Meng and Gong Lianyu had never seen the appearance of the original witch. Not to mention the people of Dongzhou, even the people of the World Sea had never seen her face. Because she stayed in the World Sea for less than a few years and then disappeared mysteriously. Later generations carved her into a statue based on her dress and stood quietly in the port city in the center of the World Sea. Although she is called a witch, people regard her as a god. when they are in that port city, even enemies will be obedient. Because there is a special secret method in that port city. No matter whether one is in the return to void realm or the peak of the refining spirit realm, their realm will be suppressed to the first level of the refining spirit realm. Many people believe that the secret method is the last gift that the original witch left for the world sea before she left. In any case, it is still unknown whether the original witch still exists in the world, but the obsession left in the black box by the original witch 10,000 years ago, whose wish is just to kiss someone, this fact makes everyone feel a little absurd. No one could have expected this abrupt action. After all, who would have thought that the original witch who unified the world sea 10,000 years ago and stopped the disputes, and the obsession left in the black box, would kiss Musian in front of the two empresses after attaching to Wei Mengru? Not to mention Yao Meng and Gong Lianyu, even Musian's mind was in a mess at this moment. It's true that he likes beauties, but the sudden and unethical action of the original witch still made Musian a little confused for a while. Then, another thought popped up in his mind: Sister Mengru's lips are so fragrant and soft. The slightly cool touch, accompanied by a sweet and light fragrance, feels like touching ice cubes, and there is also a sweet fragrance in it, which makes people want to taste it again. Musian's hand was half hanging behind Wei Mengru, wanting to hug the slender waist of the maid and feel the beauty of the maid's body. At this time, he suddenly felt a chill in his heart, a cold feeling like a thorn in his back. He didn't even turn his head, but realized something. Damn, Sister Mengru wants me to die? Musian felt the warmth of Wei Mengru's body while feeling the cold sweat on his back. No, this is not Sister Mengru, but the obsession of the original witch. However, why this obsession does this is still unknown. But in short, we must stabilize the situation first. Musian put his half-hanging hands on Wei Mengru's shoulders and gently pushed her away. He looked solemn and reserved. Senior, please respect yourself. I am already a married man, it is not appropriate for us to be so intimate, otherwise you should find a time when no one is around. However, at this time, Musian suddenly heard the sound of heavy iron chains again in his ears, and he looked in the direction of the sound. The sound of the iron chain came from the black fog around Wei Mengru. Crash! A chain stretched out from the black fog and silently bound Musian's right hand, while the other end of the chain tightly bound Wei Mengru's left wrist. Her snow-white wrists were wrapped in chains shrouded in black fog. Her hair was loose. She raised her head and stared at Musian with gentle and dark eyes, with crystal tears oozing from the corners of her eyes. I miss you so much. A sweet, soft, and pleasant voice suddenly sounded again in Musian's mind. Love you, love you, love you, love you, love you, love you, I have always loved you. The chains in the black fog kept colliding, as if more chains were about to emerge from the black fog. Connect you and me forever, and never separate again. That voice kept ringing in Musian's mind again, and the black fog surged with Wei Mengru as the center. At this time, the light of the pure world Blue Lotus quietly lit up. The blue light enveloped Musian and the original witch, just like the sun shining in a dark corner. Wherever the light passed, the black fog was dispelled, and the chain quietly loosened Musian's wrist. The original witch looked down at the chain on her fair wrist, and turned her head slowly in a trance. Yao Meng's light green dress was tightly attached to her graceful body. She had a fairy-like temperament and a misty body. Every inch of her skin was covered with a faint silver glow, as if she was the goddess of the sky, coming from the sky, out of the world like a fairy. The original witch was surrounded by black fog. Compared with Yao Meng, who made people feel unattainable at first glance, the original witch gave people a more mysterious feeling. Yao Meng had a blank expression. Although I don't know what happened to you in the past, he is not the person you are looking for, the original witch. Although this fairy Yao Meng seemed to have awakened the tendency of being a cuckold, it did not mean that she liked to be cuckolded, especially before, the original witch kissed Musian in front of her. In the black fog, the chain was exposed again. Clang. At this time, a golden sword of light pierced through the chain and nailed it directly into the ground. Gong Lianyu made a hand gesture, and two more sharp blades of light fell, piercing the chain through the ground. If it had nothing to do with her, Gong Lianyu would probably just stand aside and watch the show. However, the intimate behavior of the original witch just now was not only aimed at Yao Meng, but also at the master of the Sword Palace. In front of the two empresses, N.T.R. Musion, looking at this world, I am afraid that the original witch is the only one. Thank you, two seniors. Musion immediately thanked him and stated his position. Gong Lianyu glanced at Musion inadvertently, pursed her lips, and said indifferently, "You really enjoyed it just now, didn't you? Plan to hug and feel the taste of the original witch?" He was like this with other people in the past. "I have seen it a few times when I woke up occasionally," Yao Meng answered in a calm and pleasant voice. "There is a holy place in my sword palace. In the past, the disciples of the sword palace would repent in the holy place if they made mistakes. After half a year, they can turn over a new leaf and make rapid progress in their cultivation. After the end of this Ascension Conference, I will take you to the holy place to practice for half a year." Gong Lianyu looked at Musion straight in the eye and said faintly. In the cuffs of the black palace skirt, the heart lock seemed to be ready to move. Are you going to lock me up in a small dark room?" Musion felt a huge psychological pressure. Fortunately, as Musion had expected in the past, Fairy Yao Meng was a kind and gentle fairy sister, beautiful and kind. Her red lips parted slightly, and her voice was pleasant like a warm breeze blowing into my heart. "He and I will not be separated for the next 1,000 years, so you should put away those unrealistic ideas." However, before Musion could breathe a sigh of relief, Yao Meng glanced at Musion casually and continued, "Even if you want to repent and reform, you should follow me back to the Yaoqi ancestral land after this." "Musion, weren't you guys fighting just now? Why are you united now and firing at me? And the Yaoqi ancestral land is so sacred? Weren't we still in the bathing pool of the ancestral land last time?" Musion complained crazily in his heart. At this moment, he suddenly felt a pair of slightly cool and soft jade hands touching his face, and he looked over subconsciously. The original witch raised her delicate jade hands and held Musion's face without knowing when. Yao Meng frowned slightly, but she didn't move at all, just staring at the original witch. She no longer needed to attack, because the obsession left by the original witch in the peach blossom was about to disappear. Gong Lianyu's sight also fell on the original witch, and looked at the gentle and dark eyes of the original witch. For some reason, there was an inexplicable sense of strangeness in her heart. Why would a witch's obsession left over from 10,000 years ago fall in love with Musion? Did the original witch just recognize the wrong person? How could it be possible? Even if it was just an obsession, it was definitely an existence that should not be underestimated. How could she recognize the wrong person? Musion stared at the original witch's dark eyes and the black mist that was now all around her, and hesitated. "Senior, who are you looking for? Maybe I can help you in the future." The original witch never answered Musion, but just raised her head and stared at Musion infatuatedly. For some reason, looking into her eyes, Musion suddenly felt a huge sadness and bitterness in his heart. He didn't know where the sadness came from, but he felt like he was about to be drowned by the sad emotion. The original witch suddenly showed a charming smile. "Wait for me." When the soft and sweet voice fell, she hugged Musion's neck with both hands under the gaze of the two empresses, and pressed her slightly cool and soft lips on Musion's lips. She took another half step forward and pushed Musion to the stone pillar behind her. She passionately and greedily asked for Musion's kiss, and her hands were just around his neck, as if she was afraid that he would disappear. Musion did not disappear. But the original witch disappeared. A peach blossom fell lightly with the cold wind. Musion saw the peach blossom from the corner of his eye and subconsciously reached out his hand. The peach blossom swayed like a boat in the water and gently fell into his palm. The gentle and pleasant voice in the court was clearly heard by everyone. "I will come to take you back." For some reason, Musian suddenly had a feeling. The obsession left by the original witch in the black box may have completely disappeared. He held Wei Mengru's head with one hand, and looked at the peach blossom in his palm with the other hand, with a little more emotion in his eyes. What kind of a strange woman is the original witch? It took less than 3 years from enlightenment to unity. After unifying the world sea, she disappeared mysteriously, leaving only a black box. Could it be, she had already anticipated what would happen 10,000 years later, so she left the black box on purpose? At this time, Musian suddenly heard the beauty in front of him suddenly make a soft voice, his eyes slightly condensed, and his attention quickly returned from the peach blossom to the yellow-skirted maid in his arms. Her pretty face was white, her lips were plump, and her thick, brush-like eyelashes trembled slightly, as if she was about to wake up from a deep sleep. Musian stared at Wei Mengru, thoughts flashing in his mind. After a brief moment of daze, he immediately reacted and wanted to push Wei Mengru away from his arms. However, at this time, Wei Mengru had slowly opened her eyes. The two looked at each other, Wei Mengru blinked, and looked at Musian in silence. Musian put one hand on the back of her head, and the distance between the two, could even be said to be negative. Their lips intertwined with each other, and she could even feel the gentle breath of her young master on her pretty face, and the gentle and soft breath of the maid also gently fell on Musian's face. Time seemed to freeze at this moment. After a while, Wei Mengru finally reacted, with a frightened look in her eyes, subconsciously waving Musian's hand away, taking a half step back, gently wiping her rosy little mouth with the back of her hand, and felt her heartbeat speeding up. Why did it become like this? What happened just now? The maid's mind was in a mess. When she closed her eyes, the face of Musian that was so close just now echoed in her mind. Obviously, that face should have been seen from the past to the present, but when it was really so close, Wei Mengru still felt uncomfortable and flustered. Sister Mengru was quite cute like this. Musian looked at the scene silently and couldn't help grinning. A maid who usually treated her young master coldly, showed such a helpless look after being so close. This huge contrast made Musian feel a little moved. But soon, Musian realized something, coughed lightly, and explained, "This matter is a bit complicated, but Sister Mengru was just attached to the obsession of the original witch, so." Musian roughly explained what happened just now, but when she heard the end, Wei Mengru looked at Musian with coldness and contempt. Even if what Musian said was true, Musian not only wanted to kiss, but also wanted to taste the maid's lips again. This is why Wei Mengru was flustered just now. But in front of the two empresses, Wei Mengru, who has a dull personality, could never say such words. Yao Meng stared at the two of them quietly with her beautiful eyes, and then sighed with a sincere tone, "Most things in this world will be erased over time. The original witch's obsession can still exist in the world across 10,000 years, which is really admirable. She seems to be waiting for someone. But 10,000 years, who else can live after 10,000 years except for the Hedeo realm?" Gong Lianyu said calmly. "There are no two identical flowers in this world." She probably mistook Musian for someone she was in love with. However, even if she thought so, the words of the original witch at that time, "I will take you back," still made people very concerned. What if Musian is really the person the original witch has been waiting for? As the original witch's obsession left, the court fell into a brief silence for a while. Wei Mengru glanced at Musian inadvertently, and then lowered her eyes slightly, as if to hide some emotions in her eyes. Musian seemed to be still immersed in the deep love of the original witch. He sighed softly, put the peach blossom back into the black box, and then said, "There are still many clues about the original witch. Maybe there are other secrets in the black box, but now we can only investigate slowly." Gong Lianyu pursed her red lips lightly, and her eyes revealed a deep coldness. She said calmly, "There is no rush for the original witch. We will investigate slowly after this." Although the original witch just did some more extreme behaviors, it was just an obsession after all. She was not so stingy that she was dissatisfied with a small kiss. But Yao Meng was different. Gong Lianyu's eyes then fell on Musian, and she said quietly, "But there are still some things that we haven't finished talking about." Yao Meng's gentle eyes also looked at Musian. Musian. Obviously, his method of diverting attention failed. Warm TI. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 272. It has to be said that compared to the little fish in the fish pond, beings like Yao Meng and Gong Lianyu who have evolved into mosasaurs are obviously much more difficult to deal with. After all, they have experienced too many things in the past and have rich experience. In most cases, they can tell when Musian is lying at a glance. And because it is the Hedeo realm, there are means to block other people's sound transmission, or even eavesdrop on other people's sound transmission. Therefore, Musian did not dare to send messages of love to the two empresses one by one in front of them. Just imagine, the original sound transmission was supposed to be a one-to-one private chat, and then Musian was talking sweet words to one of them. At this time, he found that the other empress was listening to their conversation. Just thinking about that scene makes people sad. Despair. In short, if Musian communicated in front of the two empresses, it might turn from a private chat into a discussion group. Of course, their rich experience does not mean that their emotional experience is equally rich. At least among the few beauties Musian is familiar with, each of them used to concentrate on practicing Taoism and never fell in love, so this can give him a certain operational space. The obsession of the original witch has now left the peach blossom. Although it is not yet certain who the person she is looking for is, at least in a short period of time, the original witch will not appear again. Gong Lianyu gazed gently. Xiang Musian. Musian's eyes moved slightly, and he subconsciously looked up at the palace master of the Sword Palace, who was wearing a black palace dress and had a coquettish and mysterious temperament, and said, "What the palace master means is that the original witch may still be alive. The existence of the Hedeo realm, even if the body disappears, cannot completely disappear, unless even the last trace of spiritual consciousness completely disappears from the world. If the original witch is really looking for someone she loves deeply, she should have something left behind. Leave it to the future for rebirth," Gong Lianyu said. "So, the owner of the World Sea is probably still alive? And since the Holy Son and Saint of the World Sea will come to East Continent, and according to what they said before, the original witch is likely to be in East Continent?" Musian's eyes were a little more thoughtful. At this time, Gong Lianyu suddenly changed her voice. She stared at Musian with a hint of tenderness in her eyes and said softly, "Compared with this, do you still remember what you promised me before, Mu Lang?" Musian's head jumped and his thoughts returned to reality. "You told me before that when you return to the sect next time, you should stay away from those messy women around you." Gong Lianyu looked at Yao Meng, and the tenderness in her eyes turned into coldness. "If you are kind-hearted and reluctant to open your mouth and hurt other people's hearts, I can also do it for you and clean up those unnecessary interpersonal relationships for you, so as not to upset you in the future. For example, here is Fairy Yao Meng who claims to be your Taoist companion." The target of the attack was pointed at Yao Meng. However, the expression of the everlasting Qing Emperor remained as usual. Her temperament was as ethereal as a fairy. The corners of her mouth slightly raised a soft arc and she said, "The relationship between me and him does not need to be done yet. Others are judgmental. Forget it if it's Miss Bai. At least she is indeed a Taoist couple with Mu Lang. However, you are just an outsider who has only been close to him for a short time," Yao Meng said lightly. Gong Lianyu narrowed her beautiful eyes and chuckled, "So, you also know that you are sorry for my scabbard. A monk may not have only one Taoist monk, not to mention that this child was the first to pursue me in the past. Yao Meng glanced at Musian inadvertently, lingering on his handsome face for a while, with a smile on his lips. Besides, I also thought of ways to compensate Miss Bai before. The heaven-building pill and even the enlightenment seed were all used by Yao Meng to compensate Bai Ruoxi. In any case, she did sleep with someone else's Taoist monk. Although both parties were willing to do so, it still made Yao Meng feel a little sorry for Bai Ruoxi. Of course, she was more excited. At this time, Yao Meng changed her voice and said with a slight smile, however, Miss Bai is Miss Bai, and you are you. Although you are the same person, you are two different consciousnesses. In the final analysis, if you want to make the decision on behalf of Miss Bai, it's still a bit off. Gong Lianyu narrowed her eyes. What do you mean? If you don't understand, I can summarize it in simpler words. Yao Meng smiled and said, to put it simply, you don't deserve it. The atmosphere in the pavilion suddenly became stagnant. The winter wind and snow could not make Musian feel the chill, but at this moment, he felt the biting chill on the two of them. Gong Lianyu sneered, Fairy Yao Meng thinks I'm not qualified. Well, why not let him make his own decision and see if I'm qualified enough to make the decision for him? Yao Meng smiled, very confident, and stared at Musian with her beautiful green eyes. Can't you just let me be a little transparent? Musian's eyelids were twitching wildly, and the little soul in his body seemed to be roaring. He looked forward and said, 2 seniors, the junior is free, so. Yao Meng said softly, that's not what you said when you were with me in the past. You said that my body and mind belong to Sister Fairy. Her eyes were still gentle, but there was a hint of danger deep in them. These words sound familiar. How many women have you spoken to? Gong Lianyu sneered, staring at Musian. He was weighing in his mind whether Musian should be brought back to the Sword Palace after the Immortal Ascension Conference. The Sword Palace is rich in resources, and with her personal guidance, Musian's future practice will be smooth and he will avoid too many unnecessary contacts with other women. Musian's heartbeat could not help but accelerate, and his scalp was numb from being stared at by the two men. No matter how strategizing Mr. Mu is, facing the most powerful being in the world, he can't use any good means. There was a fierce argument here, but on the other side, Wei Mengru was sitting silently on a tea chair nearby, drinking hot tea, watching her young master act out how to deal with emotional problems. It has to be said that although she has been quietly following Musian as a maid all year round, no matter how you look at it, Wei Mengru is an extremely beautiful woman, whether it is her convex and graceful figure highlighted by the goose yellow dress, or even that Zhang's pretty and cold face fully highlights her aloof temperament. She stared at Musian quietly, holding hot tea in both hands. When she noticed Musian's eyes pleading for help, the corners of her mouth slightly curved in pleasure. The maid just wants to be a bystander and eat in peace. However, at this moment, the scene of her kissing Musian flashed through her mind for no reason, as well as his face so close at hand, and her own intimate act of kissing Musian not long ago. When she saw Musian's gaze again, Wei Mengru retracted her gaze like an electric shock, lowered her eyes slightly, and looked at the teacup in her hand. The tea reflected a charming and delicate face, and as a gust of cold wind whizzed past, ripples appeared on the tea. The next moment, what was reflected in the tea was an unfamiliar beauty. She was wearing a black robe, with a hood covering most of her face. Her slightly pale and sickly complexion made the already fragile beauty look even more pitiable. The beauty seemed to know that someone was looking at her. She raised her head slightly and looked at her with her soft and beautiful eyes hidden under the hood. Wei Mengru's fingers trembled slightly and she subconsciously let go of the teacup. Snap! The teacup smashed to the ground, tea splashed everywhere, and the fragments of the teacup shot out, hitting the stone pillars of the pavilion. Musian subconsciously looked at Wei Mengru, and saw that the maid, who was as arrogant as a white swan, was looking down at the tea on the ground, with doubts in her eyes. Sister Mengru, "What's wrong?" Musian asked with a concerned tone. Wei Mengru came back from her thoughts and shook her head slowly. "It's okay, I might be a little tired. I want to take a rest first." She raised her hand to gather the pieces of the teacup together, then buried them in the ground, stood up and left the pavilion. Musian stared at the direction Wei Mengru left, with a hint of thoughtfulness in his eyes. Then, he inadvertently glanced at the beauty wearing a black palace dress next to him, and after a brief hesitation, he decided to take a gamble. He mustered up the courage to send a message: "Palace Master, I will give you an explanation of what you said before, but now I have other things to deal with, so I may have to leave first." Gong Lianyu looked at Musian with a smile in her eyes. "Why don't you say this openly, and why do you still want to communicate with me? If I say it outright, Yao Meng will not eat me tonight." Musian sent a message: "The fairy was kind to me in the past, and the palace master also gave me and Ruoxi a lot of help. If possible, this junior still hopes you can live in harmony. As long as you keep her away from you from now on, we can naturally live in harmony." Gong Lianyu responded calmly. Musian smiled helplessly and said, "Palace Master should know that the relationship between me and the fairy is complicated, and it is unrealistic to end the relationship in a short time. I will give you another month. If you are still entangled with her after you wake up next time, I will make the decision for you, let you sever the relationship with her, and take you back to the Sword Palace to practice with me in peace." Gong Lian Moon Road. Before the scabbard has entered the realm of returning to the virtual world and comprehended a ray of Taoist charm, she cannot maintain her original body for too long, otherwise she will tear the Qing Emperor to pieces today no matter what. Mu Jian breathed a sigh of relief, and wanted to talk to Yao Meng again. However, as soon as his eyes drifted away, he saw Yao Meng looking at him with a half-smile, with a deep coldness in his eyes that seemed to be a bit of teasing, as if he is saying, "Are you quite brave, transmitting messages in front of me?" Then, a cold fairy voice came to Musian's ears. "Wait for me in the room tonight." Yao Meng looked sideways slightly. Although he was still as cold as the Nine Heavens' mysterious lady, there seemed to be a touch of charm in his eyes. "I have something that I want to talk to you about tonight." Wei Mengru sat cross-legged on the couch, slowly closed her eyes, held her breath and concentrated, and was about to enter a state of meditation. At this time, she suddenly seemed to notice something vaguely, and said coldly, "Why are you here? Aren't you afraid that if someone finds out, you will be locked up and given a good education?" She opened her eyes and stared in the direction of the window. Musian climbed in from the window. Under Wei Mengru's cold gaze, he smiled and said, "I told Yao Meng and the others that I wanted to come over and take a look at the situation on your side first." Wei Mengru raised her eyebrows slightly, and the corners of her mouth curved into a mocking arc. "Will they agree? It's really surprising that he didn't lock his young master in a small dark room." The smile on Musian's face could hardly be maintained. "This maid really doesn't care about anything, she just rubs salt into his wounds. I finally took the risk to communicate with them separately. I promised that I would give an explanation later." Musian shook his head and sighed. "In fact, the most important thing is that Gong Lianyu woke up this time because she was awakened by the original witch, but her spiritual consciousness cannot occupy Ruoxi's body for too long yet. If Miss Bai now comprehends a ray of Taoism and is promoted to the return to the void realm, Gong Lianyu will not have such restrictions. If so, today's matter may not end so easily. Even in this situation, he has a lot of words to waste, and he has to go to comfort the fairy himself tonight. So why did you come to see me?" Wei Mengru raised her head and looked at her young master. "I just felt like you weren't feeling well, so I came over to see you," Musian said with a smile. Under Wei Mengru's gaze, he sat on the couch minding his own business. When Sister Mengru was attached to the original witch's obsession, did she feel anything? Musian asked. Wei Mengru hesitated for a moment, then gently shook her head. "I don't feel anything. I don't remember what I did before, I just have some vague impressions, I feel like I have a dream. When she said this, she thought of the mysterious figure she had just seen in the tea for no apparent reason, and her delicate hands crossed together subconsciously. He glanced at Musian again, hesitated for a moment, and whispered, "I'm sorry for causing you a lot of trouble. Musian will be tortured by the two empresses today. In a sense, she also has a share of the credit. After all, Gong Lianyu was awakened by the breath of the original witch, and it was Wei Mengru who awakened the obsession of the original witch. If kissing is considered troublesome, please be sure to increase your intensity next time," Musian said solemnly. Wei Mengru glanced sideways at Musian. While staring at the slumped young man and the concern in his eyes, after a brief hesitation, Wei Mengru inadvertently looked away. "This really doesn't look like you dash." Before she finished speaking, Wei Mengru glanced at the palm on her cool and slender hand, looking at him silently. "What to do?" Wei Mengru asked. "I just want to comfort you," Musian said. Wei Mengru said "Oh," then glanced at the door of the room, and suddenly said, "Senior Kingdi, what are you doing here?" "Sister Mengru, we look like masters and servants but are better than siblings, but I have always regarded you as my sister. We are not suitable like this." Musian retracted his hand. Then he glanced casually. The door was empty, not a soul in sight. Wei Mengru glanced at him disdainfully and said coldly, "Since it's just a matter of comfort, why do you have to worry about being discovered?" Musian sighed softly, "Sister Mengru, there should be more trust between us. I have enough trust in you. Also, I want to meditate and practice now," Wei Mengju said. Musian nodded slightly, "I won't disturb Sister Mengru." Wei Mengru closed her eyes. After a while, she felt a pair of black and white eyes staring at her. She opened her eyes helplessly and silently pointed to the door. Musian glanced at the open door and suddenly realized, "Sister Mengru, do you want me to close the door? But it's almost night, and it's not appropriate for us to stay in the same room." Roll. That night, Musian returned to his room with the mysterious black box. After putting the black box into Naja, he planned to officially start meditating. He is currently at the peak of the 4th level of God refining, and is only one bottleneck away from the 5th level, and this bottleneck can be broken through at any time. But Musian did not intend to break through in such a hurry. After his last death, his body was strengthened by 2 8th-grade elixirs. Coupled with the path he took in the God-refining realm, Musian's physical body is now far away, much stronger than his peers. This time in the martial arts world, there may be some people who don't like him or are insidious villains to sneak up on him, and the thunder calamity of the 4th grade breaking through the 5th grade can also be regarded as a huge trump card. After all, no one wants to follow them through the tribulation smoothly. If they are seriously injured during the tribulation, they will miss the Immortal Ascension Conference this time. But Musian is different. He is now energetic and physically strong. It is not impossible for him to make reasonable use of thunder tribulation to successfully survive the martial arts world. If you bump into Ye Lingxian and others on the road, it will be easier to pass through the martial arts world smoothly. After taking off his outer jacket, Musian was about to go back to the bed and meditate. At this time, he suddenly vaguely saw a graceful figure in the curtain. Musian jumped slightly, as if he had thought of something, and slowly stepped forward and opened the curtain. Under the curtain, Yao Meng was sitting on the bed with her legs turned sideways. Her slim green skirt wrapped her delicate body, outlining her exquisite and sexy figure. Her petite feet were wrapped in a pair of silky white socks, and her hair fell naturally like a waterfall. A few strands of hair rested on her jade-like thighs. She raised her head, looked at Musian with a faint smile, and said, "Back. Why do I feel something is wrong? It doesn't seem like I want to have a good chat with me." Musian swallowed subconsciously and nodded slightly, "I'm back." As he finished speaking, his eyes suddenly focused on the green vines protruding from Yao Meng's sleeves. "This is not a good chat with me, this is clearly an interrogation, right?" Musian reacted very quickly and turned around immediately. However, at this moment, a green lotus quietly bloomed in front of him. At that moment, his cauldron was completely sealed. The vines silently wrapped around his body, from his feet to his hands, and then gently dragged Musian into the bed. The curtains fluttered in the wind, covering everything in the bed. Yao Meng had a faint smile on her lips, and her slender green jade fingers gently stroked along Musian's neck, and her slender hands were placed on his face, and her crystal clear blue eyes looked down at Musian. "I said, I have something, and I want to talk to you again tonight."